Chapter 1067. From the sun god to the light of dawn to the god of light. Luoshanda played a very important role in the history of the gods. He could even be said to be one of the protagonists in the history of the gods. From the beginning of the calamity of dawn to the destruction of the arcane empire, Luoshanda occupied an absolute dominant position among the gods. He represented the part of goodness, light, and justice. Even the queen of spiders, Lolth, whom Soren had always been afraid of, did not dare to make a fart in front of this ancient god. This was because Luoshanda was now close to a symbol among the gods, especially after the fall of the original god of justice, Tyr. After the god of light integrated the clergy of justice into himself, his existence was even more revered by the gods. Luoshanda had a lot of clergy. In the past, she once had the priesthoods of movement, birth, creativity, dawn, revival, self-protection, spring, vitality, youth, and so on. But she later took these priesthoods and assigned them to other gods. The spring priesthoods of the goddess of agriculture were inherited from her father, and the light of dawn was also given by Roshanda. By now, Roshander's priesthood had been reduced a lot, and his core priesthood had changed to light and justice. He was now the combined form of the sun god and the god of justice, and was currently the most powerful god. In the past, this god's overly aggressive altruism and selflessness hindered his pursuit of goodness. His arrogance and fanaticism covered his thoughts, making him unable to see the inevitable results of his actions. He pursued perfection, but was headstrong and refused to listen to the opinions of others. These shortcomings were fully revealed during the Dawn Calamity, but it was also the great calamity that was second only to the time of troubles that changed him. At that time, Luoshanda intended to rebuild a new divine system, but it ended up causing a divinity impact. His failure destroyed several gods and powerful otherworld creatures, caused the collapse of many theocratic countries, and indirectly led to the destruction of the city of Song, Maze Zeno. This failure allowed Luoshanda to grow, and when the arcane empire was destroyed, the sacrifice of the father of the oak tree completely changed the god of light. Now, there was no god who could fight against the god of light alone. Even the ancient Lady of Night was in awe of him. Soren needed the support of the goddess of agriculture. This was because he knew very well that even if he had advanced to become a great divine power, it would still be very difficult for him to be a match for the god of light. Without the support of the god of glory, this plan would become extremely difficult. Due to his deep hatred for the undead creatures, Roshander had made Klemvox the ally of the god of eternal rest before he became the god of light. Although there were some conflicts between the two during the plan to destroy the god of tyranny, Bane, and cracks appeared again during the arcane empire, the god of light still supported Klemvox. That was the problem. If Klemvox still had the support of the god of light, then history would repeat itself. The god of light had appeared and dealt a heavy blow to Naruto, and had indirectly helped Klemvox regain his priesthood. This was not what Soren wanted to see. Klemvox had already proved his dereliction of duty. The turmoil of the undead meant that his doctrine was not in line with the lower planes. Even the ancient god of death, Jurgil, was a little disappointed in this. At present, only the goddess of agriculture could persuade the god of light. Mother Gaia had retired, Father Oak had fallen, and the entire natural divine system had collapsed. Today, the only one who maintained a close relationship with the god of light and could persuade him was the goddess of agriculture. She was the daughter of Mother Gaia and was also the interface between the natural divine system and the human divine system. Harvest City, in the half-bit wall of the secret realm. The goddess of agriculture pondered for a long time under Soren's gaze. After a while, a bitter smile appeared on her face and she slowly said, "My relationship with my father is not very good." After Mother Gaia retired, the goddess of agriculture rarely dealt with the god of light, especially after Roshander entered the depths of mountain paradise. She thought that her father had completely changed. In the past, although Roshander was a little reckless and opinionated, he was full of enthusiasm, kindness, and vitality. However, since Father Oak sacrificed himself to save the material plane, Roshander had become another existence. He had all the memories of the past Roshander, but even his daughter, the goddess of agriculture, felt strange. Roshander was even more pure. The god of light now seemed perfect, but the goddess of agriculture knew that this was because her father gave up a part of his humanity in exchange. The gods in this world kept their humanity to maintain their vitality, but Roshander now seemed to have been assimilated by light and justice. If the priesthood dominated the gods, then the part of humanity would be missing. As a new god, Soren did not have such an understanding. It would take at least 1,000 years for Soren to feel this. Silence. The goddess of agriculture pondered and considered the gains and losses. After a long time, she said, "I can try to help you persuade my father, but I can't guarantee success." Soren smiled and nodded. That's enough. Even if he could not get the support of the god of light, as long as he would not be hostile to him in the process of fighting for the priesthood of death, it would be enough. The goddess of agriculture thought for a moment and said, "If you take over the priesthood of death, how do you plan to fulfill your duties? You must know that this is very important. The believers of the gods have to go to the underworld after death, and the gods of death have always maintained the ancient covenant to be responsible for sending the believers of the gods to the divine kingdom. Also, many gods are very unfriendly to the undead, but with Klemvox's dereliction of duty, you must balance the position of the undead." This was crucial. To persuade the god of light, Soren had to prove that he was worthy of support. However, Soren already had a plan for this. He thought for a moment and said, "Naruto's doctrine is too extreme. He hates life and wants to destroy it. He is too biased towards the undead, which is something that all gods do not want to see. However, Kalemver's teachings are too biased towards the living. His church has always been dedicated to keeping the undead in eternal slumber. Countless undead have been killed by his believers. This has caused his relationship with most of the undead to become tense and hostile. I think in the current situation, a doctrine of the mean is more conducive to the current situation. In my opinion, the realm of eternal sleep is necessary, otherwise the material plane will be overrun with undead sooner or later. But for the undead, there is no need to expel and kill them like Klemvox. The most important thing now should be to clarify the boundary between death and immortality. The current chaotic situation is like a repeat of the time of the three gods of death. During the time of Mirko, there was the current chaos. Klemvox hated most of the undead and thought that they should be destroyed. For me, the most important thing is to distinguish between death and immortality. As long as the world of the living is not disturbed, there will naturally be a place for the undead to stay in the lower plane. If possible, I hope to divide an area between the underworld and the spiritual world to temporarily appease the undead. As for the future, we can slowly solve it." Soren actually had another set of ideas in mind, but he could not mention it at the moment because it would change the structure of the lower plane, especially the underworld. Now, the most suitable way was a more doctrine of the mean. Dividing the boundary between death and life? The goddess of agriculture smiled and said softly, "If that's the case, I think I have a better chance of persuading my father." The god of light hated all undead. But the existence of the undead could not be erased at all. If Soren really intended to draw a clear boundary between death and life, so that the world of the living would not be disturbed by the undead, then it was very possible to get the support of the god of light. After all, Klemvox's failure had proved that one could not blindly destroy and suppress the undead. Now, the catastrophe of the undead was the revenge of many undead lords for the past. For thousands of years, Klemvox had been working hard to eliminate the undead and let the dead sleep. This caused countless undead to turn their backs on him and even stand beside Naruto to resist him, the king of the undead. If Soren had the same idea as Klemvox, there would be another outbreak of the undead after a few years. Chapter 1068. Soren finally persuaded the goddess of agriculture. With the support of the goddess of agriculture, the next thing would be much easier to do. However, unless the relationship between the gods was particularly close, even allies would have to pay a price for help. However, just as Soren was preparing what the goddess of agriculture needed him to pay, the goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair and smiled gently. "No hurry, I'll let you know when I need it." In this regard, Soren couldn't help but frown and look at the other party seriously. The cost and the gain were equal. In this case, the goddess of agriculture was not in a hurry to make requests, so the requests in the future should not exceed the current cost. But now was not the time to worry about this. He finally smiled and said, "Then I'll wait for your good news." The goddess of agriculture nodded and said, "Well, I'll go to the glorious city tomorrow." There was not much time. After getting the promise of the goddess of agriculture, Soren immediately set off to return to the outer islands, but his destination was not the city of Mordor, but the city of Wealth on the south coast. It was not long before the end of the Avatar crisis. So much time had passed in the blink of an eye. After experiencing many shocks, the past glory of the city of Wealth was no longer there. However, the Church of the Goddess of Wealth was still the most powerful force here, and when the war subsided, commerce and trade would inevitably be revitalized. The Goddess of Wealth was very welcoming to Soren's arrival. In the past in-depth exchanges between the two sides, Soren had already given the Goddess of Wealth guidance, so that she had enough confidence to restore trade and economy after the war. Now what the Goddess of Wealth needed to do was to wait for the end of the Avatar crisis. At that time, many caravans of the Goddess of Wealth would set sail again. The gods had already felt it. Perhaps because of Soren's interference, the trajectory of fate had deviated to a certain extent. Although there were still many gods who fell, it was still a little less than in the past. And because there was no interference from adventurers, the number of gods who directly participated in the battle between the gods had decreased a lot, which also reduced the number of deaths. Perhaps it was because of Soren's example, the number of gods who were hiding in their fields had obviously increased. Even the Queen of Spiders, Loltha's aggro had decreased a lot compared to before. This was because many of the gods' kills had been stolen by Soren, and some of their aggro had shifted to Soren's side. The Queen of Spiders' biggest enemy was still the elven gods. "Welcome, sir." Lord Shadow. The Goddess of Wealth was wearing a long dress that shone with golden light. She looked very elegant. She personally appeared in front of the temple to welcome Soren's arrival. Soren smiled and followed her inside. The negotiation this time was very easy, especially after they had received so much support. The Goddess of Wealth had also given them some help. Soren stayed in the Temple of Wealth for a day, and then went to the place where he first rose, which was Port Tylon, controlled by the Sea Goddess. Port Tylon. Because it was an island, the impact wasn't that great. The High Priestess of the Sea Temple still maintained the order of the past, and began to pray every morning. But today seemed to be a little different. When her prayer sounded, the power of the statue of the Goddess of Ocean emitted a golden light. She thought that her prayer had been answered by the goddess, but then she saw a beautiful woman with a trident coming down from the statue. The Sea Goddess's target wasn't her, but walked directly to the front of the temple, as if she was welcoming someone's arrival. Soren's figure appeared. He smiled and nodded at the Sea Goddess in front of him, and the Sea Goddess also bowed slightly. Both sides didn't care about the others around them, and the High Priestess of the Sea Temple looked at Soren in a daze. After noticing the faintly discernible sight, she immediately lowered her head humbly. Soren was now a great existence that she needed to look up to. As a god who had cooperated with Soren in the beginning, the Sea Goddess was easily persuaded by Soren. She was willing to help Soren and assist him in obtaining the clergy of death. This was good news. Because after Soren's lobbying, he had gained a lot of support. Now, Soren only had one goal left. Moonlight Woodland. This beautiful forest was located near the ruins of the Silvermoon City. It had a special lock and was also the core area of the intersection of the Silvermoon City. In order to guard against the attack of the Lady of the Night, there were many moonwalkers stationed here. The magic circle here could absorb the tidal power of the moon, and even the gods were not sure if they could break it. When Soren arrived, it was still calm. Because the goddess of magic was not dead, the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon had not recovered much, so she was still only at the level of a mid-level divine power. If the goddess of magic died and the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon returned, then this goddess would at least be at the level of a great divine power. It could be said that Soren's interference in history had the greatest impact on her. Although the Lady of the Silver Moon herself didn't know this, and she didn't even want the goddess of magic to die. The goddesses of magic of the past were like close allies and daughters of the Lady of the Silver Moon. Soren couldn't find the goddess of magic, but he thought that the Moonlight Woodland was the most likely place to hide her. This place was protected by a powerful lock. There were moonwalkers stationed here, and in addition, there were also powerful Silver Star emissaries, spellcasters who could mobilize the power of the moon. Soren's arrival was not hidden. As the light of divinity fell, Soren's clone directly appeared outside the Moonlight Woodland. Soon, a group of tall moonwalkers appeared. Their leader was a grassland elf. The elf frowned as she looked at Soren and bowed slightly. She then said, "Lord Shadow. Welcome." In the depths of the Moonlight Woodland, a light rose. The Lady of the Silver Moon already knew of Soren's arrival and sent an oracle to welcome him. Soren nodded slightly and followed the moonwalkers into the woodland. This was a private kingdom, and almost all of them were believers of the Lady of the Silver Moon. However, Soren also saw some secret knights, which made him even more certain that the goddess of magic was hiding here. The two goddesses had joined forces and were secretly plotting something. Lord Shadow. The Lady of the Silver Moon's figure appeared on the altar in front of him. Soren didn't have many interactions with her, so they weren't close, but they weren't strangers either. Soren bowed slightly to show his respect. Lady of the Silver Moon. Suluan stared at Soren in front of her. She frowned slightly and said with a smile, "Welcome. But I'm curious as to why you chose to visit at this time." Soren met her gaze and calmly said, "I'm here to visit the Lady of the Silver Moon." And Lady Mistra. Mistra was the goddess of magic. The Lady of the Silver Moon hesitated for a moment in response to Soren's straightforwardness. She then asked, "How did you know she was here?" "I guessed." Soren smiled. This was the most likely place for the goddess of magic to be. It was also the only place where she could hide from the gods. Even after so long, they still couldn't find any trace of her. Long time no see. A tall, slender, and beautiful young human woman with translucent skin and flowing black hair appeared in the form of a long, flowing black hair. She wore a simple but elegant dark silk robe and a net belt embedded with gems. This item represented the magic network that Mistra was in charge of. This was the goddess of magic's usual incarnation. Soren had the divine title of tracking, so it wasn't surprising that he could find the goddess of magic. Thus, Mistra simply showed up. Soren met Mistra's gaze and smiled. Long time no see. Lady Mistra. This was Soren's final goal. Because of her relationship with Klemvox in the past, she was a great help to Klemvox in his quest to regain his divine title of death. Since the Lady of the Night was also involved in this battle, the two goddesses would secretly help Klemvox regain his divine title. They were Soren's last obstacle. What Soren needed to do was to find a way to persuade them and gain the support of the goddess of magic and the Lady of the Silver Moon to weaken them and strengthen himself. To put it bluntly, that was, Soren had to knock on Klemvox's wall. Only in this way could he gain the greatest advantage. P.S. This book is almost finished. Don't worry. There's an epilogue after this. The epilogue is about the kingdom of God and spans 10 years. Chapter 1069. There was no doubt about it. Mistra was in a difficult position right now. It was obvious from her conflicted expression that she was in a dilemma. The Lady of Silver Moon had no intention of helping either. After all, she had to make her own choice. She had also guessed that the goddess of magic was able to escape her previous ambush thanks to Soren's help. However, she didn't know what kind of relationship Soren had with Mistra. The gods of this world were relatively open-minded. In some ways, they were similar to the unrestrained Olympian gods. However, they had been silent for far too long. No one knew what would happen in the long history of this world. Even the gods could be wiped out. The goddess of magic stared at Soren, her eyes flickering. She was Mistra. She was also Midnight, a former human mage. Klemvox was her lover before she became a god. Although their relationship gradually faded, there was still some history between them. On the other hand, Soren was her close ally. To some extent, he could even be considered her current lover, or so she thought. If she had to choose between the two, it would undoubtedly be difficult. One was her past lover, and the other was her current lover. Although the former was far away, they still had a past. The latter, on the other hand, had saved her life once and helped Mistra survive a life-threatening crisis. How should she choose? Soren seemed to sense the goddess of magic's dilemma. He looked a little disappointed. I don't want to make things difficult for you. However, this is a battle of fate. Whether it's me, Clemvox, or Naruto, this battle is unavoidable. It's inevitable that the three gods of death will reunite. The future world also needs this power. The Bator Inferno is restless. At this point, Soren glanced at the two goddesses' expressions. As expected, their expressions changed slightly. He then continued, perhaps you don't know, but Sirik has already broken free from his seal. He's also secretly watching everything. The undead hated Clemvox, which made Naruto even more powerful. Whether it's Naruto or Sirik, neither of them can become the winner. I'm not asking you to help me fight against Clemvox. I just hope that if the final battle is between me and Clemvox, I won't be your enemy. It seemed that it would be difficult to win over the goddess of magic as an ally, which disappointed Soren greatly. Even though he had saved the goddess and helped her through a crisis, she still couldn't stand by his side. It could be seen from the very beginning. After the goddess of magic was injured, she never appeared in front of Soren. Instead, she hid in the Silver Moon Lady's place. Soren, who was extremely disappointed, had already excluded the goddess of magic from his circle. Someone who couldn't stand behind him at such a critical moment wasn't worth his effort. However, he still had to fight for it, so he said, I only hope a little. You can stay out of the battle between me and Clemvox. If the final victor is me and him, then I hope you can stay neutral. It seemed that he couldn't win over the goddess of magic. For this reason, Soren could only lower his request and ask her to stay out of the battle between him and Clemvox. This was already a very low request. After all, Soren had saved her once. Mistra's eyes wavered a little, but she was also relieved. She even felt a little sorry for Soren. In fact, Clemvox had met her a long time ago and asked for her help against his enemy. However, at that time, the goddess of magic hadn't recovered from her injuries, so she didn't agree. In contrast, Soren's request was much lower. He didn't force her to help, but only hoped that she would stay neutral and not be his enemy. At this point, the goddess of magic had no choice. The goddess of magic had no other choice. She could either agree to Soren's request or become his enemy in the future. This wasn't something that anyone wanted. Thus, the goddess of magic quickly replied, I can promise you. I'll stay neutral between you and Clemvox. Soren nodded. Then, he bowed slightly to the Lady of Silvermoon and left the forest. To be honest, he was still very disappointed. However, some things couldn't be forced. It could only be said that the goddess of magic couldn't stand on his side this time. In the following battle between her and Lady of the Night, Soren wouldn't help her either. According to the progress of history, the goddess of magic would be at a disadvantage in the next battle. In the past, even with the help of adventurers, the goddess of magic couldn't defeat Lady of the Night. This time, Soren wouldn't help her. Whether she could survive or not would depend on her luck. Because the goddess of magic's choice had exhausted the last bit of affection between Soren and her. Soon, Soren left the Moonlight Forest, but this time, he didn't leave with a smile. Only his eyes were a little cold. Sigh. Just after Soren left, the Lady of Silvermoon shook her head and sighed. You still can't let go of your past with Clemvox? In fact, you should choose to work with Soren. He's a powerful and scheming god. Moreover, he holds the divine title of Shadow, and doesn't have a good relationship with Lady of the Night. If you agree with him, it's very likely that we'll be able to pull him to our side. Hearing the Lady of Silvermoon's words, Mistra's eyes flickered. Although every Mistra would inherit the memories of her previous life, the consciousness that dominated was still Midnight. In other words, Midnight only had the memories of the past goddess of magic, but her thoughts were still her own. This caused her to unconsciously lean towards Clemvox. Today's actions had undoubtedly pushed Solan's relationship with him further away. For a moment, even the goddess of magic felt a little lost. After all, Soren had saved her once, and the two of them were quite close. This choice undoubtedly hurt his feelings. The goddess of magic suddenly felt a little regretful. But at this point, there was no other choice. She could only look in the direction Soren left and let out a deep sigh. Outside the moonlight forest. Just as Soren's clone was about to return to the south coast, he suddenly felt the aura of battle. Then, his figure appeared near a hill. There were many corpses here. He bent down and picked up an emblem from one of the corpses. The emblem was 5 hands holding a scimitar in a circle. A follower of the god of war, Clemvox? Soren frowned and muttered, "Looks like the god of war is finally going to make a move against the god of war." There wasn't only one god of war. Many gods of war had been born from this divine title, but the most powerful one was undoubtedly the god of war, Tempest. He was the victor in history. At least 10 gods of war had been born in the long history. The god of war had been trying to eliminate them since the time of Mother Earth. At present, the only surviving god of war in the human god system was the god of war that Soren had just mentioned. One of the two gods was a lesser god, and the other was a greater god. It looks like the god of war is going to take back all the divine titles of war. It was a battle without any suspense. Soren took a look and left. The gods were all planning something. There were too many things happening in the Avatar crisis, and he didn't have the energy to participate in many of them. It was almost time. It was getting closer and closer to the promotion ceremony of Nero. This battle would be a big mess. As for who would be the winner in the end, no one knew. Soren also had to make more preparations. Clemvox had obviously started to act. The goddess of magic didn't agree to stand behind him. There was no doubt that Clemvox had secretly looked for her. Since he had already looked for the goddess of magic, Clemvox would definitely try to rope in other gods. Soren had to be more prepared. The most important thing now was the god of light's attitude. As long as the god of light supported him, then the goddess of magic's attitude wasn't too important. After all, there was still the Lady of Night watching in the dark. Chapter 1070. Long Sleep, Realm. This kind of power was mostly given by the gods of order. Kalember, Jurgal, Osiris, the god of death of the Muhammad pantheon, and Uligilan, the god of death of the Halfling pantheon, all had the power to give the realm of eternal rest. Soren slowly let go of the secret scroll in his hand, and then murmured, "Long Sleep, Realm." If he wanted to compete for the clergy of death, then the Long Sleep Realm was something that must be maintained. Without the Long Sleep Realm, it meant that the dead would be disturbed, and a large number of the dead would not be able to rest in peace. Things were not too bad. Shortly after Soren returned to the city of Moder, he received a message from the goddess of agriculture. The god of light seemed to support him a little. It seemed that the god of light was disappointed with Clemvox this time. Although he thought that Naruto should pay the greatest price for all this, Clemvox also had an unshirkable responsibility. In the long history, there had never been such a big undead riot among the previous gods of death. Since the ancient god of death, Jurgal, many undead had been suppressed in the lower planes. Although this time it was because of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox undoubtedly failed in his duty. Perhaps it was because of this that Soren came into contact with Naruto. This ancient one seemed to have the idea of selecting a new successor. The god of light has made some progress. Although he did not win over the goddess of magic, he also kept her neutral. Jurgal does not seem to support Clemvox very much. No wonder he met me, it should be because of the power of slaughter. Naruto, Clemvox, Sirik. There are many undead kings behind Naruto, and his power is still the strongest at present. And this time the undead disaster was launched by him. Naruto has the most powerful power of death. Clemvox's strength has been greatly reduced, but his secret allies should still have some. Siric's power is the weakest, and his relationship with the gods is also the worst. Therefore, in the following battle, he should be hiding in the dark. He pondered for a long time. Soren finally opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "Death is still Clemvox's domain." In other words, in Clemvox's eyes, Naruto is his greatest enemy. As long as he defeats Naruto, he will be able to recover his strength. At that time, no one will be able to stop him from taking back the Death Priesthood. Naruto understands this very well. As long as he defeats Clemvox, he will be the undisputed god of death. In that case, my target should be Siric. Only by killing Siric first and letting Clemvox and Naruto exhaust a bit of their strength will I have more confidence in killing them. On the surface, the main forces of this battle were still Naruto and Clemvox. Soren was just a schemer, so it was best for him to kill the other schemer first. The power of death was getting stronger and stronger. Now, the population of the material plane was only about 40% of what it used to be. The undead kings obtained a large number of souls from the material plane. This was their reward, and it was also something that Naruto acquiesced to. Naruto's promotion ceremony should be launched within this month, and what Soren needed to do now was to find traces of Siric. Come. Soren's figure appeared in the great temple, and he ordered the arcane assassin who served him, send the rogues in the central area to find out any news about Siric. Also, send someone to check on the pygmy god system. Siric seemed to have attacked the pygmy god system. He was a cunning god, and he was always thinking of ways to strengthen himself. Time passed little by little. With the gathering of the power of death, Clemvox's church suddenly became active. The members of Clemvox's church were usually silent, to the point of being gloomy. Many of the members joined the ranks of the undead king after losing their loved ones to the invasion of the undead creatures, or even after experiencing death themselves, and being brought back to the mortal world. There was no doubt that Clemvox's church grew stronger in the current environment. After Clemvox's return, the church quickly recruited a group of people who were affected by the undead disaster. Naruto won the support of the dead, and Clemvox won the support of the living. In this disaster, too many people were killed by the undead, and their surviving relatives joined Clemvox's church. The counterattack against the undead began after the Dragon Witch Church was severely injured by the giant dragon. Perhaps the gods could no longer tolerate Naruto's actions, or perhaps Clemvox persuaded the other gods. Currently, at least 3 gods began to launch a counterattack against the undead. The glorious city finally made a move. The paladins gathered and began to attack the undead's base camp. Under the influence of this, the other gods' churches also began to take action. As a god from another world, Naruto's biggest weakness was finally exposed. That was, he did not have many allies among the gods. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold world, everything was the same. To him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all dying creatures shone with green and black sparks of joy, and he liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto sincerely, hoping to obtain Naruto's power. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. The god's goal was Naruto's temple. This was the origin of all death, and also the source of the outbreak of the undead disaster. However, Naruto's temples were usually hidden. Even in places full of evil, they were usually built underground, and were usually part of the underground tomb. Most of the temples contained undead creatures and other creatures that spread death or created death, such as banshees and devils. Therefore, the gods soon realized that something was wrong. This was because their church had encountered another terrifying enemy, and that was, devils. Yes. The devils seemed to have joined Naruto's camp. In the counterattacks, people suddenly found traces of many devils near Naruto's temples. This made people feel uneasy. Clemvox's church pushed forward in the first wave of attacks, but when the church members found more and more Naruto's underground temples, they encountered very fierce resistance. Large numbers of undead creatures, numerous necromancers, and higher devils gradually appeared. Lesser devils, imps, hornet devils. At first, only a few low-ranked devils appeared, but as the battle escalated, the shadows of babas, chained devils, Anzu devils, hellcats, lustful devils, overlords, ice devils, and horned devils gradually appeared. Finally, when the abyss devils appeared in Naruto's camp, the gods finally realized the severity of the situation. Clemvox's church was once again damaged. The evil devils were involved in this battle. After the abyss had continuously probed the material plane many times, the cunning devils finally entered the material plane for the first time. And this time, they chose to support the evil Naruto. At this moment, many gods even suspected that the outbreak of the undead disaster was the scheme of the incomparably evil existence that lived in the depths of the Bator Inferno. Chapter 1071. Everything was for the sake of souls. In fact, whether it was the high and mighty gods, the demons of the bottomless abyss, or the Bator Inferno, the most important wealth was souls. For a long time, whether it was the Bator Inferno or the bottomless abyss, the number of souls that could be obtained from the river Styx was extremely limited. Most of the high-quality souls were divided among the gods. After all, the faithless were only a small part of them. The remaining souls were all ugly and not very useful. That was why there were special existences like soul stealers in the lower planes. Generations of death gods were strictly guarded against the Bator Inferno and the bottomless abyss because the responsibility of the death gods was to maintain the flow of the river Styx and maintain the home of souls after death. Therefore, the most common opponent of the death god's servants were the soul stealers from the lower planes. And now, it seemed that Naruto had colluded with the demons. Most of the underworld had fallen into Naruto's control. Some undead lords had also reached into the underworld. After the underworld lost control of Clemvox, there was no doubt that the demons had also taken a share of the loot. Naruto had betrayed the river Styx's interests. In order to make the demons take action, they had to give them benefits that they could see, and it would be best if they could get it right away. Now that the demons' army was escorting Naruto, the gods could be sure that a part of the river Styx had been stolen by the demons. This discovery made the gods a little angry and uneasy. Because all gods followed a basic principle, and that was, unless the souls of the believers were particularly outstanding, such as those that were close to the level of the holy spirits, they would be sent to the gods' kingdoms by the death god's servants after passing through the river Styx. But now, who would still believe in Naruto's death god servants? Who wouldn't be worried that their believers' souls would be stolen and desecrated by the demons? Far away in the east, just as the southern part of the continent began to counterattack against the undead, many monasteries in the eastern countries also joined forces to eliminate the mummies and undead. Some of the members of the Dragon Witch cult had fled to the Desert of Death, but they did not give up because Nero was still very powerful. They had joined the god of death, Nero, and captured many flying dragon subspecies to create a new batch of low-level dragon liches. These were puppets controlled by the Dragon Witch sect. Although they were slightly weaker, they obeyed orders. At this moment, near a barren mountain range, one of the allied forces from the Eastern Kingdom was approaching this mountain range. The undead in the depths of the desert were all awakened by Naruto's evil power. For a long time, Naruto's church had been spreading in the desert. Among the allied forces from the eastern countries, the figure of the young girl Cicada was a little eye-catching. On one hand, she was too young. Standing among a group of middle-aged legendary monks, she was very eye-catching. On the other hand, it was because she belonged to a new force. This Fist Master's reputation had soared in the battle against the ancient evil. Now, she was already the leader of the Night Shadow monk group. The members of the monk group were blessed by the Shadow Lord. They could master and strengthen the special skills of Shadow Nanda and Lunar Shadow. This power allowed them to completely hide themselves and jump through the shadow space to a certain extent, making the monks' movements more erratic. This was the group of monks blessed by Soren. Compared to the past, Cicada had quickly matured after many battles, especially after becoming the leader of the monk group. She also had a trace of a superior aura. The situation in the Eastern Kingdom had improved a lot. After the elimination of the ancient evil, the remaining enemies were much easier to deal with. The Luo demons had been defeated, and some of the Een spirits had been resealed. At present, the only troublesome thing was the mummy army. The god of death, Nero, had awakened many ancient mummies. Some ancient pyramids even had mummies sealed in them that were older than the Arcane Kingdom. This battle was very crucial. Because below this place was Naruto's great temple, a base camp for awakening and reviving the undead. There were standards for the size of the temples that served the gods. The lowest level was the altar, then the altar, the temple, the great temple, and then the great temple. As for the Pantheon temple, it had not appeared in the material plane yet. The altar was very simple. It could be activated after a blood sacrifice. The altar was a little more troublesome. At the very least, it needed to be continuously sacrificed and prayed for a period of time. Then there was the temple, which was the place where the gods responded and prayed and sacrificed for many years. Generally, the temples of the gods would only appear in towns and cities, and it would take several years to build, and it would often last for decades before the glory of divinity shrouded it. The temple was the official headquarters of the church. A temple was equivalent to half a wizard tower, and most of the temples took decades or centuries to build, so these temples often did not change their positions easily. Finally, there was the Great Temple. Such a place must be covered by a trace of the god's mind. Just like Soren's Great Temple, he could easily perceive what was happening inside. The Great Temple itself was equivalent to the core camp, and the statues inside were all possessed by the god's body. At present, even Soren only had one Great Temple, and it was only in the center of Motor City. Other than that, the highest level in other places was the temple level. The destruction of any great temple by the enemy was a serious blow to the gods, and even directly weakened the power of the gods and the church to some extent. Therefore, the defense here was also very strong. Naruto's collusion with the devils had caused too much hostility. Not only did the eastern countries launch a counterattack, but other places were also looking for and destroying Naruto's temples. At this time, at the top of the mountain in front, hundreds of Dracolic were hovering in the sky. This place was guarded by the remaining members of the Dracolic religion. In addition to the believers of Naruto's church, there were also some devils. The White Cloud sect and the Shadow sect can be responsible for the surprise attack. A fist master with white eyebrows sat on a chair and said to the other monasteries and forces present, "But those Dracolic are very difficult to deal with. They fly in the air, and it's difficult for monks to deal with them. Monks could fly in the air for a short period of time, but they had to learn the ethereal form, which most monks could not do." The others frowned when they heard this. All the forces gathered here were from the eastern countries, and the monasteries were the mainstream. Monks were very strong on the ground, but it was hard to say if they were in the sky. There was a short pause. Then the fist master looked at the Empress of the East on the right and said slowly, "I think only the Empress has a way to deal with these Dracolic." Many monasteries' eyes lit up when they heard this. The Empress of the East fell into silence. After a while, she said, "Yes. I will summon ancient allies to deal with them." Chapter 1072. Good. The fist master stood up excitedly. He looked around at the others, and his gaze paused on Cicada for a moment. He said in a deep voice, "Then prepare to attack. This time, we must get rid of these undead and bring peace back to the Eastern Kingdom." The leaders of the various forces went to prepare. Before Cicada left, she glanced at the Eastern Princess. Legend had it that this princess had some kind of mysterious power. She could summon a powerful creature from the depths of the eastern mountains. The battle soon broke out. The next day, the monks attacked the members of the Dragon Witch cult in front of them. As the battle broke out, the Dracolic circling the mountaintop also moved quickly. One by one, the flying dragons soared into the sky. Hundreds of undead subspecies wyverns almost covered the sky, causing countless people to feel a trace of depression and depression. They exuded a strong aura of death all over their bodies, and the ghostly green soulfire danced in their pupils. Ordinary people would be frightened just by a glance, and even professionals would find it difficult to deal with these enemies. The droll hated these undead, but they couldn't do anything to them. No transformation spell could deal with so many Dracolic, and most spells couldn't easily attack the flying dragons in the sky. However, at this moment, a strange melody suddenly came from the back of the camp. Accompanied by the sacrificial ceremony of many beautiful dancers, some kind of strange fluctuation quickly spread to the farthest place. This was a very ancient dance of the Magispriests. The Oriental dancer's predecessor was actually a witch, and the dance was first born to communicate with heaven and earth and offer sacrifices to the gods. Although history had changed a lot, and the existence of witches had almost disappeared in the Eastern Kingdom, some ancient Magispriests were still preserved, and the one the Eastern princess had mastered was the most powerful one. A strange drumbeat sounded. A bonfire was burning in the center of the altar. Many graceful Oriental dancers were dancing in a special ritual dress. Their sleeves were fluttering in the wind, and the one leading the dance was the Empress of the East, whose face was covered by a veil. The battle was still going on. Because of the existence of the Dracolic, the monks, droll, warlocks, and rangers didn't have much of an advantage. It could even be said that they were suppressed by the enemy. However, along with the loud and clear cry of an eagle, a gust of howling winds suddenly came from the distant sky. A gigantic eagle appeared in their line of sight. It had a pair of golden wings that were graceful and full of power. When it spread its wings, it left a shadow on the ground. Even from afar, one could feel the aura of an overlord of the sky. Giant Eagle. It's the Eastern Giant Eagle. A flock of Eastern Giant Eagles with wingspans of more than 10 meters flew over from the horizon. They had sharp claws and beaks that looked as if they were made of metal. Part of their feathers were gold, while the other part was pale gold. These Eastern Giant Eagles carried a trace of special pressure. When they appeared, even the Dracolic became restless. They felt uneasy, as if they were facing their natural enemy. In the Far East, legend had it that there was a creature that could fight against the dragons. It was the Eastern Giant Eagle that lived on the peak of the Eastern Mountains. It was a magnificent mountain that reached the sky and was called the Eagle Mountain. These great Eastern Eagles were even faster than the great dragons. Legend had it that they lived at the very edge of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the edge of the material plane. Beyond the Eagle Mountain was an endless sea of clouds. After the Eastern Giant Eagles appeared, many droll and monks who had not joined the battle bowed to the leading Golden Giant Eagle. The Eastern Giant Eagles held a very high position in the hearts of these people. Many of the monk school's trials went to the Eagle Mountain in the sea of clouds at the edge of the world. A droll school of the Eastern Kingdom's goal was to transform into an Eastern Giant Eagle. The loud cry of the eagles resounded through the sky. These Eastern Giant Eagles swooped down at the Dracolic in front of them like ferocious predators. Their speed was so fast that they were like lightning streaking across the sky. They attacked the enemy's vital points the moment they attacked, keenly attacking the weak points of the flying dragon subspecies. Suddenly, a series of roars came from the sky. The figure of the Dracolic fell from the sky, and countless golden, blood-stained feathers fluttered down. The Eastern Giant Eagle suppressed the Dracolic in front of them. However, dragons were still the kings of the sky. The Eastern Giant Eagles paid a heavy price in the battle. In just the first round of battle, 5 or 6 Eastern Giant Eagles fell from the sky. However, these Eastern Giant Eagles did not retreat at all. They followed the ancient covenant, and there was never any thought of retreat in their eyes. They were brave and fearless. In ancient times, these Eastern Giant Eagles had once served the sun, so their feathers were blessed by the gods and turned golden. Although they no longer had a god to serve, every Eastern Giant Eagle had been constantly rushing higher into the sky from the moment they were born. When they got closer to the radiance of the sun, their wings would transform into a golden color. Eastern Giant Eagle, neutral good, challenge rating 16. The fierce battle was still going on. However, as soon as the eastern great eagle appeared, a faintly discernible gaze was cast upon the battlefield. Soren watched everything. He did not expect the eastern giant eagles to enter the battlefield before the last wave of demons. According to his memory, these ancient creatures were finally summoned by the god of light. The most common type of eagle in the material plane was the ferocious eagle, while the eastern giant eagles belonged to another branch of the mythical eagle. The ferocious eagle's challenge rating was 3, while the mythical eagle's challenge rating was 6. The basic challenge rating of the eastern giant eagles was 12. If they turned golden, their challenge rating would be 16, which was enough to compete with many young dragons. When these creatures reached a certain level of strength, they would directly go to the upper plane. At that time, they would become the eastern giant eagle, heavenly realm, challenge rating 18. The other branch would roam the astral plane. Their bodies would become quite terrifying, and their challenge rating would be 22 and above. However, they were extremely rare. They were created during the sun god's time, which was to say, they served Shanda in his previous life. The Draklik fell one by one, and the number of eastern giant eagles decreased. When the enemies in front of them broke through, some ancient and wise beings appeared on the battlefield. They looked like humans, but they were not completely human. These ancient beings were the tree shepherds, followers of the oak tree's father. Since the oak tree's father sacrificed himself, the tree shepherds left the droll order. They stayed in the eastern desert, constantly healing the world's wounds. Golden seeds were planted one by one. The tree shepherds were not as slow and powerless as they looked. With the surging of the force of nature, towering trees rose from the ground. These were the trees that they planted in the depths of the desert. When the catastrophe came, these trees that had spirituality gathered all their vitality into a seed and let the tree shepherds take it away. Welcome the wrath of nature. With a low roar, the giant trees in front of him suddenly came to life. They turned into huge tree ants that rose from the ground and walked forward with the earth trembling. Traces of strange power were connected to Soren's heart. When these tree ants appeared, Soren's plant domain suddenly became restless. He tried to infuse his consciousness into one of the golden oak trees. Suddenly, Soren realized that he had succeeded. He entered the tree ant, and in an instant, the golden oak tree in front of him grew rapidly and turned into a giant tree ant that was more than 20 meters tall. Glory of the oak tree's father. The tree shepherds became restless for a moment, but it quickly calmed down. Soren tried to move his body. This was a temporary incarnation, and it seemed that the plant domain had taken control of the golden oak tree in front of him. This feeling was completely different from before. His movements were a lot slower, but each of his movements was full of strength. Soren even felt that he could easily defeat an adult dragon. The roots of the tree were connected to the ground. A steady stream of energy flowed into his body from the ground, healing his injuries and replenishing his mana. Soren tried to wave his hand in front of him, and countless vines rose from the ground. They were like flying ropes that entangled the enemies in front of him. Then he approached with heavy steps, and with just a light punch, a powerful enemy was smashed into meat paste. What a terrifying strength! The golden tree ant he turned into was even stronger than his demon form. Chapter 1073. The tree shepherds were a little excited. They seemed to think that the golden ant that Soren had infused was related to the father of the oak tree. Thus, many ant guards surrounded Soren and cooperated with him to break through the enemy's defense line. This was something that Soren had never experienced before. After transforming into a golden ant, Soren's defensive abilities were shocking. He was basically immune to normal physical attacks, and his resistance to magic was also shocking. Under the absolute suppression of his size and strength, any of Soren's normal attacks were comparable to that of an old dragon. Neither the Draklik nor the demons were his match. A group of Ent forced their way to the entrance of the temple like tanks. Behind them were countless corpses of Naruto's followers, but their battle was basically over. Because the Ent's body was too large, the entrance of the temple could not be entered at all. Next, it was time for the monks to show off their skills. Many monks, rangers, and droll began to advance, and Cicada looked thoughtfully at the golden ant that Soren had transformed into. She felt a familiar aura, but she was not sure if it was. A fierce battle broke out. This was a battle that would determine whether or not the desert of death could be settled down. Many monasteries had sent out their higher-ups. There were dozens of legendary monks and druids in the area visible to the naked eye. Soren tried to break away from his Ent's avatar. As Soren's figure left, the incomparably tall golden Ent immediately shrunk to a height of 12 meters. The Ent shepherds nearby seemed to be in deep thought, as if they had felt something. The father of the oak tree did not fall. He has only fallen into a deep sleep, but he is still watching us. An old Ent shepherd said excitedly, as if Soren's avatar was the father of the oak tree's divine will. However, Soren knew that the father of the oak tree had truly fallen. Although he could not understand how it existed, the gods could not sense the father of the oak tree, so it should be dead to a certain extent. Otherwise, the god of light would have done everything he could to revive Father Oak. As a former god of nature, Loshanda had always believed that the existence of Father Oak was an indispensable part of the world. With the power of Father Oak, it would be much easier to repair the damage to the material plane. The battle continued. There had been a large number of Naruto believers in the temple for a long time, and many devils had been summoned to the material plane. However, Soren had nothing to do with the upcoming battle. In fact, it wasn't just the eastern kingdoms that were searching for and destroying Naruto's shrine on the other side of the continent. Siric's aura. When Soren's divine sense left the golden oak tree, he sensed a familiar aura. At the back of the martial monks, a legendary rogue seemed a little out of place. He didn't look like a human from the Eastern Kingdom. Standing among the group of martial monks, he was a little eye-catching. At the same time, Soren felt the power of the 3 gods of death from him. Siric's chosen. Soren seemed to have found something, and his expression suddenly became a little surprised. Because of the clergy of murder, Siric's ability to sneak and hide was amazing. Soren had been looking for him for a long time and couldn't find him or his chosen. He didn't expect to find one here. It's all thanks to Sir Madeira this time. An old droll nodded slightly to express his gratitude to the rogue that Soren noticed. If Sir Madeira hadn't found this temple, I'm afraid this time's turmoil wouldn't have been so easy. Madeira was the rogue. He looked like an elegant middle-aged noble. After hearing the words, he waved his hand and said, "It's everyone's duty to fight against the evil Naruto. You don't have to thank me for this. Let's destroy these evil people in one go." Hearing his words, Soren suddenly thought of something. It seemed that this rogue had found Naruto's shrine, then told the martial monks and joined forces with them to launch an attack. What is Siric planning to do? Is he using the power of others to weaken Naruto's strength? Soren absolutely didn't believe that Siric's chosen would be a righteous ally, so the only explanation was to use external forces to attack the enemy. Many high-level monks joined the battle. However, the rogue named Madeira didn't join them. He quietly escaped into the shadows and then left to the other side of the battlefield. This was a chosen with the ability to permanently hide. No one noticed his departure. Sauron was the only one who noticed him and quietly followed behind him with his incarnation. The rogue left and went straight south. After about 10 kilometers, he came to the vicinity of a hidden underground cave. This god's chosen one vigilantly observed the surroundings and set up a trigger trap before cautiously entering. A little trap was not a problem for Soren. He quickly slipped into the shadows and followed. Then, after a series of twists and turns, he arrived at a hidden basement. It was a very simple altar. It didn't seem to have been built for much time, at most half a month. "My lord." The chosen knelt in front of the altar and prayed, "Madeira has completed his task. The fools of the monastery are attacking Naruto's shrine. It seems that we can completely destroy them today." A shadow appeared. A hazy body appeared in the distortion, and then a man with a pale face appeared. "Very good." Siric's incarnation was full of joy and pride. He nodded and said, "Continue to prepare. Naruto is about to hold the promotion ceremony, and Clemvox is about to launch an attack. Our opportunity is right in front of us. Madara was also excited when he heard this. Yes. My lord will retake death. Siric's figure faded. He didn't recover much power. Although he plotted against the pygmy gods, he also offended a new enemy. He had to find a way to sow discord to find an opportunity. The incarnation of divinity gradually dissipated. Such a simple altar couldn't sustain Siric's incarnation for long. Soon, his divine sense left the place, and Madara began to destroy the altar. He couldn't let anyone know of Siric's existence because Clemvox also hated Siric. However, at this moment, the space around them suddenly became still. A dark figure turned solid. Soren's incarnation suddenly appeared and directly grabbed Madara's neck. Then, he used an extremely difficult mind control spell to control Madara. I didn't expect to catch a big fish here. Soren's expression was full of joy. He activated his tracking domain and murmured, I finally found you. You cunning fox. A trace of divine power spread out. Soren instantly captured the fluctuations of the altar and determined a coordinate in the far south. At the same time, he used the soul interrogation spell on the chosen in front of him. He believed that he could interrogate a lot of useful information from the chosen's soul. Chapter 1074. This time, he really caught a big fish. Siric sowed discord and used the power of the monasteries in the Eastern Kingdom to fight against Naruto's church. But he never thought that Soren had been paying attention to the Eastern Kingdom and caught him by the tail. In terms of divine power level, Soren was now a mid-level divine power close to a great divine power, and Siric had been sealed for too long. At present, he was at most a low-level divine power close to a mid-level divine power. There was a whole divine power level difference between the two sides. With Soren's divine power of tracking, Siric was almost unnoticed by Soren. It was difficult for Soren to find Siric without seeing Siric with his own eyes. But now that he saw Siric's altar and avatar, it was much easier to track the target. Siric intended to make the water muddy and let Clemvox and Naruto both suffer, and Soren intended to kill him first. As long as Siric was killed, Soren would inevitably be promoted to a great divine power. At that time, there would be no problem in entering the battle between Naruto and Clemvox. Not to mention that the power of Mordor itself was very strong. As long as Soren made a move at the right time, the possibility of winning in the end was very high. After discovering Siric's trace, things became much simpler. For a time, the entire south coast entered a special atmosphere. The forces of the outside world thought that Soren was going to attack Naruto in revenge for secretly instructing the demons to attack Mordor City. In fact, the gods all guessed that Naruto was the mastermind who controlled Naruto. At this time, Soren was definitely going to hit Naruto when he was down, and it was also something that they were very happy to see. This time, it could be said that Naruto made the public angry because even the Church of the Storm Lord destroyed a temple of Naruto. They thought that Naruto must be responsible for the plague that spread in the Amazon rainforest. This terrible plague reduced the population of the Amazon rainforest by half, and some tribes were basically destroyed. The environment of the primitive jungle was too easy to breed the plague. Coupled with the secret actions of Naruto's followers, the scope of the plague was very large. The gods only saw the movements on the surface. The elites of the Church of Mordor, including the Nightwalkers, the Arcane Assassins, the Central Administration, the Inquisitors, the Arcane Assassins, and so on, were all handed over to the High Priest and the Chosen. These people secretly went to the Raven Hills in the southern region. With the efficiency of the operation of Mordor, the whole transfer only took about a day. After Soren's body arrived at the south coast, Mordor had secretly gathered more than 1,600 middle-grade professionals, more than 300 high-grade rogues, and more than 100 other high-grade professionals. At the same time, the combat power of the legendary level had reached about 1/3. The time to act was the next night. If the gods were to give Siric an evaluation, there was no doubt that it was very uniform, that was, madman. Sirik was a madman. His madness made him set up too many enemies, and he was even judged twice by the good and evil gods. It could be said that he was completely alone, although he was very powerful. A narrow-minded, self-centered, and extremely extreme god. Such a god was also different among the gods. No one was willing to cooperate with him. Even the Lady of Night was also hostile to Sirik, thinking that his existence was a great threat. In the dark, some lurking shadows approached the Raven Hills. This was the base camp established by Sirik in a short time. Because there were too many enemies, Sirik's followers did not dare to move in the city. His temples were in the wilderness, and most of them were built underground. In the dark corner of this land, there was a special emblem, a skull without a jaw with a black light background. This was Sirik's emblem. Only his followers could find and enter the underground temple. Sirik's kingdom was in the supreme throne, but now it was abandoned. He had been sealed for too long, and his kingdom had withered too much. As a supreme evil god, even if he had been sealed for so long, Sirik still had many priesthoods. The core of them were lies, murder, conspiracy, fraud, and illusion. The domains he had were chaos, evil, destruction, illusion, and trickery. Do it. With a cold voice, the shadows in all directions quickly moved forward, and soon a fierce battle broke out. Sirik's followers lurked in the dark. They could access the murder domain, and they also had amazing stealth abilities. The two sides engaged in a fierce battle in an instant. Not only did Sirik's followers die in large numbers, but Soren's followers also paid a big price. The enemy was very strong. Sirik's domain and priesthoods gave his followers more special abilities. At the same time, in the depths of the underground shrine, the attack from above had alarmed the Chosen. A black figure quickly arrived at the altar in the depths, speaking to a slender man with frightening black eyes and deathly white skin. "My lord. Not good. We were attacked by the Shadow Church." The man who was absorbing power on the altar suddenly opened his eyes. Sirik frowned and sensed for a moment. Then his face changed greatly. "Shadow Master, Soren." A terrible shadow shrouded him. This was the perception brought by his priesthoods. He still felt that he had fallen into a terrible conspiracy. "Come here." Sirik's face changed a few times, then he said to the Chosen in front of him. The Chosen did not hesitate and quickly came in front of Sirik. At this moment, Sirik suddenly reached out and held the Chosen's head, and then an evil divine power with divinity poured into the Chosen's body. Ah! A shrill scream sounded in the depths of the basement, and soon the Chosen in front of him began to change. A lot of divine power poured into his body, and the Chosen in front of him gradually became Sirik's appearance. A lot of divine power poured into him made him look like a real god. Trickery, domain. Deceit, priesthoods. Sirik glanced at the exact same version of himself in front of him, then slowly transformed into the form of a god's chosen one. "You stay here." Sirik looked outside and said to the avatar in front of him, "When the enemy comes in, self-destruct." After that, his figure disappeared into the darkness. Sirik quickly walked out of the temple. Along the way, he did not show the power that a true god should have. Instead, he pretended to be a chosen and quickly rushed outside to break out of the encirclement. The cicada shedding its carapace. Facing Soren, he did not have much confidence in winning, so he chose to escape. Chapter 1075. It was true that Sirik was a madman. But he was also a very cunning madman. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't have been able to track down Sirik until now. Sirik, who was in the form of God's chosen, was very cautious. He restrained his power, and even when fighting against the chosen of Soren's church, he only maintained a slight advantage. He wasn't in a hurry to kill his opponent. Instead, he took advantage of the moment to open up the distance between them, and then instantly escaped into the darkness. There were a lot of enemies. Sirik was able to see over 1,000 invaders from the Shadow Church within his field of vision. Although he broke free from the seal and developed his church, Siric's followers were obviously much weaker than Soren's. After all, Soren had other churches, while Siric was sealed for thousands of years. He had to start from scratch. He endured the pain in his heart and gritted his teeth as he gave up on these followers. Although he couldn't wait to kill Soren, Siric knew that now wasn't the time. He had to be patient and accumulate strength. In the vast night, Siric carefully escaped from the encirclement, and then quickly retreated to the north. He couldn't stay in the south any longer. Soren's church had too much influence in the south, and their intelligence network was too extensive. It would be easy for them to find him. However, just as Siric rushed out of the encirclement, a slender man appeared in his sight. "It's an honor to meet you." Soren's figure emerged from the darkness. He smiled at Siric's chosen and slightly bowed, "Dark Sun, Your Excellency Siric." The tracking clergy locked onto the target. If it wasn't for Soren's tracking clergy, perhaps this time Siric really would have escaped. A little bit of divine light appeared. A powerful pressure came from all directions, and some sort of quintessence energy sealed off the space around them. Siric's expression immediately became unsightly. Hee. That's really a big deal." Siric's ashen face reverted back to its original appearance. His expression was a little desperate as he said, "So many people actually came. I think I should really feel honored." In the southwest, Vivian and Lillian appeared. In the northeast, the incarnation of the goddess of wealth slowly walked out. In the south, the figure of the goddess of agriculture sat on a chair made of emerald green vines, deep in thought as she stared at Siric in the distance. In the north, Princess Royal's figure floated in mid-air, her expression seemingly unmoved. In the direction of the sea, the incarnation of the goddess of ocean was holding a trident and watching from afar. It seemed that she had no intention of fighting. Soren smiled but said nothing. 6 mid-level divine powers and above surrounded Siric. The powerful spatial seal made it impossible for him to escape. As for the possibility of survival, it was very slim. After all, you are the legendary Dark Sunday. Soren didn't care about the sarcastic tone of the other party's voice at all. He calmly said, "I think it's not too much to be careful when dealing with the former Prince of Lies, right?" He was Siric. He was once the first person among the gods. At his peak, he was more powerful than the Lord of Light and Father of the Oak Tree. He was the legendary Child of Destiny. He rose quickly in the first Avatar crisis and seized the power of the 3 death gods. He also stole the priesthood of Shadow. When Siric was at his peak, not a single god could stand up to him alone. Even in the end, when he faced judgment, the gods had to join forces to deal with him. No one dared to despise him. Even if Siric was a madman, he was the most terrible madman in the multiverse. If it weren't for Siric's own death, there would be no Clemvox, the king of the dead. He would become the real Lord of Death, the absolute king of the lower planes. Even Asmodeus might not be his opponent. At his peak, Siric was closer to the greater divine power than the current Lord of Light. To some extent, he had become the same existence as Jurgil. Unfortunately, he still courted death in the end. If it weren't for Siric's desire to become the God of Gods, and his madness led to his own destruction, Siric would definitely be the most favored god of fate. His experience was even more exaggerated than Soren's. Although Soren had quickly reached the level of a mid-level divine power, Siric had once directly advanced to a great divine power in the Avatar crisis. After advancing to a great divine power, he immediately began to dabble in greater divine powers, wanting to become the god of gods. Although he had been sealed for so long, Soren still didn't dare to despise him. After all, he was the real Child of Destiny. If he gave Siric a chance, who knew what would happen in the end? If he really seized the power of Naruto and Clemvox, then the direction of history would definitely be problematic. Even if he was trapped in a desperate situation surrounded by gods, Siric still didn't give up hope. He was looking for opportunities and flaws. But to his great disappointment, although the other gods didn't intend to attack immediately, no one was careless enough to let him escape. This was Siric. The goddess of agriculture had heard of his name before she was born. He was one of the number one figures that the gods feared and hated. If Sirik had any weakness, it was that he was too conceited. Basically, Sirik didn't have any allies, and his relationship with the other gods was very tense. When he first created the Sirik scripture, he wanted to enslave the other gods. If he didn't fall into madness after reading it, many gods would have been plotted against by him in the end. No one dared to relax their vigilance. Even the goddess of wealth and the goddess of ocean, who didn't intend to attack, were cautious and wary of any possible movements of Sirik. A silver-white streamer appeared. A strange silver-white curved sword appeared in the palm of Soren. This was an artifact that hadn't been completely completed, but it had reached the power of grade 5. After Soren advanced to the great divine power, it would be completed completely. At that time, it would become a powerful artifact above grade 6. Your Excellency, Dark Sunday, Soren's figure was surrounded by shadows, and in an instant, he turned into the form of a true god. He slowly said, "Let's settle our grievances. The past of the three gods of death should be completely ended here." The power of the ancient god of death, Jurgil, was divided into three and became the three gods of death. Three great divine powers, evil existences. During the first Avatar crisis, the three gods of death fell at the same time. Sirik gained most of the power, but because of his own actions, Clemvox took away the priesthood of Mirko. Later, the god of tyranny, Ban, was resurrected. Clemvox entered the underworld and ruled over death. Sirik became the god of murder. A new structure of the three gods of death appeared again. Before the Arcane Empire, Sirik plotted against the god of tyranny to steal his divine power. But he didn't expect that his actions had already angered the gods. He was judged a second time and sealed, and the priesthood of the god of tyranny was taken away by the Dread Lord. Clemvox became the big winner at that time and completely controlled the underworld of death. Now, Soren's identity as the son of slaughter was the continuation of the three gods of death. Sirik still had the power of the god of murder, and Clemvox still represented the ruler of death. This was an inescapable battle of fate. Soren, Clemvox, and Sirik were destined to only have one winner, and this winner would become the true Lord of Death. It seemed that Sirik didn't have the chance to do so. 6 mid-level gods began to approach gradually. They completely surrounded the Prince of Lies from 3 sides, the sea, the land, and the air. This time, Soren did not hold back. He mobilized almost all his allies. Chapter 1076. The earth was shaking. Terrible explosions continued to sound, and the people nearby, whether they were believers of the Shadow Church or the Murder Church, none of them dared to come close. Because this was the battlefield of the gods, any mortal, even legendary professions, could die in an instant if they approached. The powerful power of divinity sealed the space, and more than one breath that made mortals tremble appeared. The fierce battle caused countless cracks to appear on the ground, and the surrounding vines and plants grew wildly. The cold ice and snow fell from time to time, and occasionally, a dazzling golden light flashed, like a golden lightning that tore the sky. "I'm not willing." The low roar was like a beast, and blood dripped down his arm. Sirik's expression was full of madness, like a beast trapped in a trap. His whole body was covered with a layer of white frost, and there was already ice around his body. Except for the divine blood that was not frozen, the surrounding vegetation had completely withered. There were fatal wounds on Sirik's back and shoulders. Even with the superior magic, it still could not be healed in a short time. His divine shield had already been breached by the joint forces of the gods. In his somewhat chaotic memories, this scene seemed a little familiar. Soon, he recalled that painful time. That was the second time he was judged by the gods. He was expelled and sealed by the gods. The scene at that time was so similar to what he was experiencing now. It's time to end it. Soren's face was as calm as ever, but his palm was slightly trembling. Sirik cut off half of his left palm, and even with the divine power, it would take some time to recover. The enemy was much more difficult to deal with than expected. Although Sirik was now weak to a lesser divine power, Soren had a feeling of fighting against a greater divine power. The power of murder. The power of trickery. The power of illusion. If it were not for the Princess Royal's ability to freeze illusions, the battle would be much more difficult than it was now. But everything was about to end. Sirik's divine force had already been exhausted. Without a divine shield, there was no way he could withstand the attacks of so many intermediate gods. A silver-white stream of light streaked across the sky. Soren became one with the silver blade, instantly unleashing the power of his divine domain of shadow. Sirik waved his razorback in a futile attempt to block Soren's attack, but his depleted divine power was no longer enough to support him. As the silver light cut through his body, Sirik finally fell to the ground with a pale face. Sirik had not broken free from the seal for long enough. Although the church was established, the time was too short. Under the background of the Avatar crisis, Sirik could not accumulate enough divine power to maintain the defense. In the face of the joint attack of the gods, he was even more powerless. The golden blood of divinity sprinkled down. Countless dazzling lights surged out from Sirik's body. Most of them surged into Soren's body, while some of them landed on the others. A row of data appeared before his eyes. God of murder, Sirik has been killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 75,800,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 210 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 65 divinity. Seize target's divine domain of murder. Your domain of slaughter has been enhanced. Your divinity of slaughter has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Seize target's divine domain of lie. You've gained domain of lie. Seize target's divine domain of deception. You've gained domain of deception. Seize target's divine domain of delusion. You've gained domain of illusion. Seize target's divine domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of conspiracy. Seize target's domain of craftiness. Your domain of craftiness has been enhanced. God of murder, Sirik has been killed. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Compatibility 95%. You've gained domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of deception. You've gained domain of slaughter. You've successfully seized target's divine domain of murder. An unprecedented amount of divinity surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before. The indescribable compatibility allowed Soren to absorb the power that dissipated after Sirik's death. This power was so similar to his that the degree of fusion was quite astonishing. 210 divinity points. 65 divinity points. This was almost the majority of the power that Sirik had accumulated since he broke free from the seal, and now all of this divinity had surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before when killing any god. No god could let Soren absorb such a large amount of divinity like Sirik. This was because their origins were also the three gods of death, and the degree of fusion of divinity far exceeded that of other gods. Seize target's divine domain successfully. You've gained domain of murder. You've gained a new domain, destruction. You've successfully advanced to great divine power. A part of the divinity was scattered. Although Soren and Sirik's divine domain and divinity had an amazing compatibility, there was still a considerable amount of rejection. That was, Soren belonged to the lawful evil faction, while Sirik belonged to the chaotic evil faction. There was no way to merge with this divinity. Sirik's divinity with the power of chaos was scattered to the others. Some of it was absorbed by the gods who came to help, and some flew to the mortals' bodies. At this moment, a surge of divinity gushed out from Soren's body. The gods present couldn't help but be surprised when they saw it, and then smiled and nodded to express their congratulations. He had advanced to a great divine power. After seizing Siric's divinity, Soren directly advanced to a great divine power, and his divinity value had reached a very shocking level. At present, Soren's divinity value was 715 points, and his shard of divinity was 350 points. Basically, he was almost the same as the old great divine powers, and his divinity value might even be a little higher. Now, most of the power of the three gods of death had been seized by Soren, and the only part left was Klemvox's. As the former king of the dead, Klemvox's divinity was obviously stronger than Siric's. If he succeeded in killing him, then Soren might be stronger than the ancient god of death, Jurgil at his peak. After all, there was still Naruto from another world that he needed to deal with. Chapter 1077. As the power of divinity was taken away, Siric's body gradually turned into golden light spots and dissipated. The bodies of the gods were all in the form of pure energy, so there would be corpses left behind after killing powerful gods. Soren had destroyed Siric's soul, and with the complete death of Siric, on many dark underground altars in the material plane, the statues representing Siric instantly lost their brilliance, and then cracks appeared one after another, and finally the whole statue completely collapsed. If a god fell, these statues would automatically be destroyed, and at that time, the believers would know that the god they believed in was finished. My lord. The figure of the high priest appeared on the edge of the battlefield. She whispered to Soren, "The church has lost a lot of believers, and the giant has also died." Siric's assassin was very difficult to deal with. The new legendary warrior of Mordor, the giant, was attacked from behind by the enemy when he was fighting against a divine assassin. Although the giant did not die on the spot, the result was extremely tragic. The giant died of exhaustion after fighting against 3 enemies. The gods could quickly create a group of legendary professions. Although these people lost their higher potential in the end, the improvement in combat power in a short period of time was obvious. Soren merged with the powerful power in his body. He felt the new priesthood, and then said, "I know. Bring his body back to Mordor. Inform the temple to prepare for the resurrection ceremony." Finally, he had a great divine power. Soren lifted the state of God's descent, bowed slightly to express his gratitude to the other gods who helped him, and then directly returned to Mordor. All the gods present were important allies. No matter what they needed, they had to wait until Soren obtained the position of the Lord of Death. The Shadow Church paid a huge price this time. There were 7 archbishops who died, and there were about a dozen other legendary professions. The great divine power was a benchmark. In the context of the Avatar crisis, the great divine power also represented one thing, that was, Soren could finally use the resurrection spell. During the period of the Avatar crisis, it was relatively easy for the gods to resurrect a person. Although it consumed a lot of power, it was still within the acceptable range. Even the weak gods could do it. But it was completely different during the Avatar crisis. If you wanted to resurrect a person, only the existence of a great divine power could try. Princess Royal directly returned to Arendelle. The goddess of wealth left a message for Soren and left as well. The goddess of ocean did not join the battle. She just nodded and merged into the waves. The goddess of agriculture came to Soren's side to take a look, shook her head and sighed, "Siric has finally fallen. Perhaps this is a good thing for the gods." The battle ended. Siric's destruction was no surprise, and after Soren's alliance with so many gods, it was impossible for anything else to go wrong. One competitor had been eliminated. However, Soren also had a lot of things to do. Naruto was about to make his move, but Soren had one more important thing to do. Expand his own temple. Soren had reached the level of a great divine power, so it was urgent to build a giant god temple in Motor City. A complete giant god temple consisted of many parts. First, there was a magnificent main temple, and then there were 2 or 3 subordinate temples. A complete giant god temple was equivalent to the headquarters of a divine system. The believers of the entire divine system could pray here. At the same time, the giant god temple was also a direct link to the divine kingdom. The giant god temple was the limit of what could be built in the material plane. The next day, many legendary professions, including the giants, were sent to the temple in Motor City. The grand prayer ceremony was presided over by the high priest, and Soren came to the center of the temple in the form of a god. A huge amount of faith power was gathered. Even with the interference of the Avatar crisis, Soren still condensed a majestic divine power after advancing to the level of a great divine power. The resurrection ceremony consisted of two parts. If the body was intact, then it could be solved with only a greater resurrection spell. During the Avatar crisis, ordinary resurrection spells were ineffective. Only after the end of the Avatar crisis could ordinary resurrection spells resurrect targets who died within 12 hours, and the bodies must be intact. However, Soren had the divine title of Death, after all, so it was easy for the resurrection spell to recall the part of the soul. Almost none of the bodies in front of him were intact. In the fierce struggle between the two divine churches, almost all the believers who died in the battle had incomplete bodies. In this case, only Soren could resurrect them. Greater limb regeneration. With the emergence of the golden light, Soren transformed into the form of a god. First, he cast a legendary greater limb regeneration spell. This was the most advanced regeneration spell. Even the head could be repaired and grown back, but if there was no soul, many times the caster would become a vegetable. The incomplete body of the giant kept regenerating. It looked like a troll who had a part of its head cut off. It quickly recovered to the most basic human structure, but the lost hair didn't recover. To cast greater limb regeneration, one must have enough knowledge of the human body. In fact, this was a legendary, necromancy, spell. The dead in front of him kept regenerating, and their bodies became complete again. However, they did not resurrect, they were still dead. Greater resurrection. The dazzling golden light suddenly rose. When Soren completed this super difficult divine spell, countless low chants sounded. Then the golden light rose in the center of the temple. With the convergence of the power of death, transparent souls passed through the space crack in the center of the temple and were directly summoned by Soren from the river Styx. All resurrection spells were related to the god of death. It was difficult to succeed without the consent of the god of death. Even in the period outside of the Avatar crisis, the resurrection spells of the gods were actually dealing with the god of death. The souls from the river Styx were injected into the body. A burst of vitality was awakened, and the believers who had died in front of him gradually opened their eyes. Their expressions were a little dazed, and it seemed that their consciousness was not very clear. This was the drawback of the resurrection spell. Any soul would come into contact with the river Styx after death. The earlier the resurrection, the less contact with the river Styx. But even so, they would lose part of their memory. The number of times a person could be resurrected was limited. The power of the river Styx could not be underestimated. If a person was resurrected too many times, even the gods could not separate them from the river Styx. However, these people in front of him were obviously not one of them. Soren successfully cast the resurrection spell and resurrected all the legendary professions who died in this battle. However, the price of doing so was that his divine power was greatly consumed, and the golden light over the temple became very dim for a while. Resurrection. It was never a cheap spell. Chapter 1078. In the Land of Bones. Countless undead wandered in this wilderness. This was originally an ancient battlefield of the Arcane Empire. Later, due to the fall of the floating city, it formed a strong energy radiation. The resurrected undead here were more dangerous than in other places because their bodies were shrouded in a negative energy field. Any effective attack could drain the enemy's attribute value. This was a forbidden zone for the living. There were no living beings in sight. Occasionally, there would be some necromancers shuttling back and forth. They were busy transporting strange materials from the lower planes, produced in the region between the spirit realm and the underworld. A huge altar stood in the middle of the land. This altar covered a large area. It looked like a white bone fortress. Around the altar were 7 strange towers. They looked a bit like obelisks, but the top of the obelisks were burning with blue flames. No creature dared to approach the obelisks. Even the liches kept a distance. This was because this was a soul-summoning tower, which was also a soul-locking tower. Countless wraiths wandered around the top of the obelisks, but they could not break free. Countless wraiths were released from the blue flames. They kept rushing outside and roaring, but in the end, they hit an invisible energy field. Some of them disappeared and were absorbed by the soul-summoning tower. The other part was bounced back into the tower. "My lord." A high-grade necromancer priest came to the altar and said respectfully, "The other soul-summoning towers have been completed. We can begin the ceremony." Along with the appearance of a dark figure, a horrible existence descended on the top of the altar. Naruto, a god from another world, took nearly 1,000 years to take root here and steal the power of the death god system. The god of death, Hell, was a famous and notorious deity. His face was dry and horrible. He was like a skeleton with rusty red skin, thick dark green hair, and a black cloak. His eyes, teeth, and nails were soaked in drugs. His black staff, Reaper, could form a blade of light in the shape of a giant sickle on the tip of the staff. It could instantly kill any mortal when it touched it. This artifact was like the Orcus staff, but stronger. Naruto was the real god of death. He could kill any mortal at will. God of death, the enemy of kindness, the abomination of life, the messenger of darkness, the king of gloom, and the reaper of flesh. In the long history, the god of death, Nero, had too many titles. He was a god of the neutral evil camp. At his peak, he was a great divine power. Although he had weakened to a mid-level divine power after coming to this world, he could not be measured by the standard of an ordinary mid-level divine power. This god of death also wanted to be as powerful as the ancient god of death, Jurgil. Hell's priesthood was death, darkness, murder, and the underworld. Was death, evil, and craftiness. Basically, any god who had the craftiness domain could not be underestimated. Just look at those gods who had the craftiness domain. The queen of spiders, Lolth, the god of murder, Sirik, the goddess of magic, Mistra, and the lady of the night, Shar. Basically, gods who had the craftiness domain were very dangerous. Naruto's body came. With his appearance, countless undead spirits fell silent. Then, rows of undead spirits knelt down as if they were worshipping their master. A strong aura of death emerged. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, countless people had died in the material plane. The disaster of the undead had intensified this process, causing countless mortals to die in the disaster. I am the Reaper of Life. I am the Master of Death. Naruto stepped into the center of the altar with a huge black scythe in his hand. With his footsteps, countless undead emerged from the ground and then flew wildly to the surrounding obelisks. The huge power of death surged. Almost at the moment when Naruto started the ritual, countless undead in the material plane sensed it. The remaining power of the long sleep domain also dissipated. Many hazy wandering souls quickly appeared, and mortals could see them with the naked eye. This situation only appeared when one was close to the underworld. Now, at the same time as Naruto's promotion, the entire material plane was disturbed. In a short time, the power of the law was eroded by death, making the material plane become like the spiritual world. Only in the spiritual world could there be so many wandering souls. In an instant, all the gods sensed it, and the ones who sensed it the most were the gods related to death. No! An angry roar came from a distant direction, followed by a golden light across the sky. The power of the long sleep domain suddenly skyrocketed, and the figures of many ghosts became hazy again. Naruto. Life hater. Clemvox's golden figure appeared in the sky, and he angrily said to Naruto, "You can't succeed. I am the king of the undead." Altars rose in the material plane. Naruto was not surprised by Clemvox's appearance. He had been preparing for this for a long time. Weak Clemvox. You don't deserve to be in charge of death. Naruto's lips curled into a sarcastic smile, and then with a wave of his hand, more than 10 powerful undead auras appeared in the surroundings. The undead, Owo. The Emperor of the Undead, Shane IX. The Demigod Lich, Sarzastan. The Skeleton King, Waterland. Powerful undead appeared in the surroundings. There were 5 or 6 famous undead in the multiverse. Even if the others were not famous, they were still high-grade legendary undead. These were all Clemvox's enemies. For a long time, Clemvox's suppression of the undead made many undead kings hate his existence. At this moment, there was a slight change in the sky. Then a huge spatial door was opened, and the emblem representing the Githyankis appeared in front of them. Another ally of Naruto had arrived. The evil ancient Lich Empress, the ruler of the Githyankis, Lich Empress Velakis, appeared in the field of vision. This terrible brain-eating lich did not completely come to the material plane. She was full of suspicion and could not imagine anyone. Even if she had an alliance with Naruto, she still held back. Thousands of eternal sleepers appeared at the edge of the land of bones. They belonged to the Church of Clemvox. Countless believers who lost their loved ones in the disaster of the undead gathered together. They were full of anger and hatred. With the power given by Clemvox, they attacked the countless undead in front of them. This was a battle between the living and the dead. Hatred made their faith firmer, and hatred also made them fearless in the face of countless undead. The muffled prayers continued. Naruto stood on the altar and absorbed the power of the obelisk. He did not seem to care much about the existence of Clemvox. There were other undead kings guarding the periphery of the altar, and this promotion ceremony was not afraid of other people's interference because Naruto's strength was close to the great divine power. Now all he had to do was to integrate the death power of the material plane. If he succeeded, he would change the characteristics of the material plane and make this plane more suitable for his rule. Chapter 1079. Clemvox's figure was stopped. Although he was a god with great divine power, under the background of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox had lost the power of a true god. All the gods were suppressed. Even Clemvox could only fight in the form of a saint. That was to say, he was now only a saint with a profession level of more than 40. If not, he would not have been seriously injured by Naruto's sneak attack for a while. Many undead kings surrounded Clemvox's figure. In the face of so many powerful liches and undead kings, even Clemvox was not easy to get away, not to mention that there was a Githyanki lich queen in the sky. Clemvox was obviously at a disadvantage. And it seemed to be a very serious disadvantage because he couldn't even force Naruto to make a move. However, after all, Clemvox was the old king of the dead. When Clemvox's figure was stopped by many undead kings, a low voice suddenly came from the southwest. Enough. You undead have caused countless disasters in the material plane. Now it's time for you to go back. In the distant sky, a male human with wounds and scars all over his body appeared. When he walked with great difficulty, it could be seen that his feet were lame, and his hands were seriously injured. His thin and short body was only wrapped in a loincloth. Although his head was slightly bald, he was bald, but there was always a comforting, gentle smile on his unattractive face. His body with thick body hair was crisscrossed with various scars, bleeding wounds, burning scars, and marks left by various kinds of torture. But even so, a powerful force shrouded the edge of the battlefield. Some kind of domain was comforting the living while suppressing the brutality of the undead. Ilmet, god of suffering. This mid-level divine power and god of the lawful good alignment seemed to be persuaded by Clemvox. He joined the battle and stood on the side of the living. The gods were all spying on them. No one dared to easily get involved in the battle of the king of the dead. Perhaps only the gods of the lawful good camp could be easily persuaded by Clemvox to deal with Naruto. After all, Naruto's behavior had seriously angered these lawful good gods. Ilmet was a mid-tier god. He was the weeping god and the broken god. His church comforted and took in the disabled, the oppressed, the poor, slaves, serfs, and so on. It had a wide range of beliefs among the lower class of the material plane. Ilmater was a kind-hearted, docile, quiet, and peaceful god. He was willing to bear the suffering of the whole world. However, although the weeping god's personality was very gentle, he would also show an extremely violent and cruel side when he was angry. He was extremely concerned about all the children and young lives in the world, and he struck down those who dared to harm those he protected. The undead calamity killed many people. Among them, the weak children were even more difficult to survive. Ilmat's anger made his pupils shine with golden light, and it looked like a sharp sword directly aimed at Naruto. This deity wasn't very powerful. She was not a fighting god, but the Church of Ilmater had many loyal followers all over the continent. In this cruel and realistic world, many victims, the sick, and the poor relied on the Church of Ilmat to survive. People in many areas respected the Church of the Weeping God, and his priests often received a lot of generous help when they practiced medicine everywhere for free. Groups of monks appeared on the edge of the battlefield. They were the legendary, Broken, the monk group of Ilmat, and one of the most powerful monk groups in the material plane. These powerful monks were good at enduring pain and turning pain and suffering into strength. They could be part-time priests, and they could also advance to secret believers, holy warriors, divine power believers, divine power seekers, and saints without being punished by leaving their profession. At the same time, because of the power of Ilmat, these monks also had the ability to heal. They could use the gift of healing, as well as a small number of healing divine spells. This suffering god paid attention to spirituality, and his church had a group of monks who gave up their physical bodies in pursuit. The destroyer was like a sharp knife that pierced into the hearts of countless undead. At the same time, the undead lords under the control of Ilmat, Kalemver, and the undead lords under Nero's control became nervous. However, Naruto himself stood on the altar without the slightest movement. He just continued to absorb the death power of this world, and said to the void, "It's time to fulfill your promise. When I take over the death god system, you can get more rewards." Who else? For a moment, the other gods were surprised because they did not feel the existence of other people. Hee. A sudden laughter echoed on the earth, and then a blood-red light tore the sky. In the sky above countless undead, a door to the Bator Inferno opened. Devil. Clemvox's frightened and angry voice sounded, roaring, "As the god of death, you actually colluded with the devil. This is an unforgivable betrayal of the gods." The god of death guarded the underworld and the river Styx. Whether it was devils or demons, they all wanted to steal souls from the river Styx. For a long time, the god of death had been secretly competing with the soul stealers, and almost all the soul stealers were backed by the big shots of the lower planes. Abyss fiends walked out of the portal one by one. Leading them was the devil duke of the first level of the Bator Inferno, Bayer. Behind him, a devil duke with a snake-like body appeared. He was the devil duke of the third level, Maman. Naruto had indeed colluded with the devil. In order to seize Clemvox's power, he had even betrayed the underworld. This was a betrayal of the gods' alliance, because the god of death's most important duty was to protect these souls and prevent them from being stolen by the demons and devils of the lower planes. Countless devil elites appeared in the sky. These were the elite troops from the Abyss Blood War. Bayer was the commander of the Blood War, and the troops he could mobilize far surpassed the other devil dukes. The situation of the battle was instantly reversed. With the appearance of the devil army, neither Clemvox's church nor Ilmater's church had any chance of victory. It was impossible for a mortal army to fight against the Blood War. Weak and shameful Clemvox. The god of death is the master of death. He is not the servant of the other gods. Naruto had a mocking smile on his face. "Look at how pitiful you are. As the ruler of the underworld, you have fallen to such a state." Countless devils attacked from the sky. In an instant, Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses. To be able to persuade the Blood War to join the battle, there was no doubt that Naruto had paid a sufficient price. The only possibility was the river Styx. He had betrayed the river Styx, allowing the devil's tentacles to infiltrate the river Styx. Chapter 1080. Is Naruto crazy? In the distant city of Motor, Soren, who was secretly watching all of this, was also shocked. Naruto actually used the river Styx as a bargaining chip to persuade the demon's main forces in the Abyss Blood War. Asmodeus must be behind this. This is simply a betrayal of the gods' covenant. A trace of anger appeared on Soren's face, and he murmured, "Is he really not afraid of completely angering Jurgil?" This was a very ancient covenant. It had existed since the time of the ancient god of death, Jurgil. When the first batch of creatures appeared in the world, their souls were transported to the underworld by the river Styx after they died. Unless it was a particularly important believer, most of the gods, whether good or evil, would eventually receive their souls from the underworld to the kingdom of God. The task of the oracles from the other world was to be responsible for the exchange of souls with the servants of death, and the servants of death's task was to protect the river Styx and souls to prevent them from being taken by the soul stealers from the lower plane. This was a battle that had lasted for countless years. The demons coveted souls, resulting in the birth of many soul stealers every year. They constantly tried to take souls from the mainstream and tributaries of the river Styx, and at the same time guarded against the powerful servants of death. Bator Inferno and the Abyss both had lords who coveted the wealth of the river Styx. The gods of death were the first line of defense against them. Every god of death had to deal with the soul stealers, and the souls themselves were the wealth of the gods of death. Even the three gods of death during the crazy period did not dare to betray this ancient covenant. But now it seemed that Naruto had obviously abandoned part of the benefits of the river Styx, and let the demon's tentacles penetrate into the river Styx. This was a very terrible thing. If the demons had an endless supply of souls, then they would continue to evolve and give birth to a large number of powerful senior demons. At the same time, a large number of souls would be desecrated, resulting in the Bator Inferno having an extremely terrifying number of soldiers. "We can't wait anymore." Soren suddenly stood up and said, "Activate the arcane tower. Activate the Mies nucleus. Prepare the super magical pulse cannon. Activate the diamond golem army. Prepare to launch a super long-range energy attack on the devil army." The demons had always been the kind of people who would not act unless they saw a rabbit. They would not act unless they got the benefits. Naruto had obviously fallen a part of the Styx into the hands of the demons. It was impossible for Clemvox's church to defeat the Devil Legion. These were the main forces of the Abyss Bloody War. How could mortals fight against the powerful legendary demons? On the battlefield, a terrible massacre was taking place. Although the undead were extremely powerful, they were still inferior to the terrifying Blood War Legion. Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless mortal believers fell under the butcher knives of the devil elites. Even the powerful broken monks could only resist the devil's attack. Among the enemies, there were many greater devils, among which there were thousands of abyss fiends. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of Nero's mouth. He loved the flowers that bloomed at the end of life, and he thought they were the most beautiful things. Batches of mortals were being slaughtered. Clemvox's power was constantly weakening, while his power was constantly increasing. Everything seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Clemvox had no chance to turn the tables. But just when Naruto thought he had won, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in the distant sky. It was like a sun rising. Countless devils had a look of horror on their faces. Then, as if they had seen an extremely terrible existence, they fled frantically toward the blood-red portal one after another. The light shrouded the earth. The golden sun was suspended in midair, and a terrifying divine power shrouded the earth. Countless undead melted like snow under this light. Even the vengeful spirits at the top of the obelisk quieted down, all of them hiding in the blue soul fire. "Life hater, Naruto." A deep voice sounded from the golden sun in front of him. The dazzling figure of the god of light appeared. Behind him was not the sun, but the 7 Hills paradise that shone brightly. Finally, he could not stand it anymore. The figure of the god of light shone brightly like the sun god in ancient times, illuminating all the land in front of him, leaving no place for the darkness to hide. Holding the scepter in his hand, he waved it toward Naruto's figure. Powerful divine power fell from the sky, and countless low prayers and chants sounded. Behind the God of Light, countless angels on the 7 hills paradise began to chant together. The dazzling holy light shrouded everything as if to purify all evil. Naruto, you should pay for all your evil deeds. Countless voices echoed. Angels of holy light, mastiff-head angels, trumpeter angels, golden-winged lions, seraphs, on the layers of hills paradise, countless angels of the Yasong God clan chanted together. With a blow from the God of Light, the whole world was shrouded in the power of holy light. Countless undead and demons were set ablaze and directly turned into ashes in the light. A trace of horror finally appeared on Naruto's face. He waved the black scythe of the God of Death toward the sky with all his might, but the next moment, his entire figure was sent flying backward. The altar under his feet instantly cracked and quickly collapsed in the fire. Kaboom! The obelisks around His Majesty fell one after another. The God of Light's full blow destroyed the entire ceremony on the spot. What terrifying power! Soren could not help but swallow and murmured, no wonder he is the existence closest to a greater divine power. Under the sky, Naruto's body had become broken. His withered face was burned by the holy light, and his whole body was emitting black fog. Countless souls rushed out of his cloak. The moment these souls came into contact with the holy light, some of them screamed and turned into ashes, while others quickly sublimated and turned into hazy white figures. They cheered and jumped, and the darkness on their bodies faded away. Then, these souls emitted a faint light and rose into the sky. One by one, they swarmed into the mountain paradise behind the God of Light. The devil's figure had dissipated. In the sky, the God of Light frowned and looked at the gradually disappearing blood-red crack. It was as if he felt another gaze from across the plain watching him. This powerful existence was not afraid at all. He faced the gaze until it dissipated. Then, he turned to look at Clemvox and disappeared into the sky. He did not kill Naruto. Because this battle would determine the ownership of the God of Death, and the power of death was completely opposite to his. The God of Light left. With just one blow, he severely injured Naruto and took away the countless souls that Naruto had collected for a long time. The evil in these souls were purified, and the good ones were taken into the 7 hills paradise. Chapter 1081. Innumerable souls flew out. These were the mortals who had died since the outbreak of the undead disaster. It was hard to say how many there were, but there were definitely tens of millions of them. Such a huge number could no longer be counted. The God of Light took away most of the good souls, and the evil souls were judged. However, there was a limit. Even gods would not easily destroy souls. In addition to these souls, there were more of the grace souls of ordinary people. These people had no obvious good and evil. They had done good and bad things in their lives, and this kind of people was often the most common in the mortal world. These grace souls gathered together, and the number was shocking. They turned gray under the light of the God of Light, and then one by one escaped into the ground. There was also the Styx River in the material plane. But mortals could not see it, because the Styx River was in the deepest part of the material plane. It was a huge whirlpool that directly sucked in souls and brought them to other planes. Under normal circumstances, when ordinary people died and were buried in the ground, their souls would be swept into the Styx River, and then through the spiritual world to the underworld. These souls that were imprisoned by Naruto were free, and the price was that Naruto's strength rapidly decreased. Soon, his aura became similar to Clemvox, but more or less stronger. As early as the God of Light appeared, the Lich Queen of the Githyankis had run away. This ancient and evil existence was so careful. It was said that in order to prevent her position from being shaken, she would suck the brains of many Githyankis who were above level 11. This Lich Queen had existed for a long time. It could even be traced back to the history of the spirit-sucking empire. For a monster to be able to live for so long, her ability to take advantage of the situation was quite amazing. When she saw that the God of Light was involved in this battle, she immediately abandoned Naruto and fled back to the astral world. The astral world was boundless, and even the gods could not find her. Motor City. When the god of light appeared, Soren's expression suddenly relaxed, and he immediately said, temporarily stop the long-range attack of the arcane tower. Gloria. You take over the authority of the arcane tower, and I will go to the land of bones personally. Gloria's figure appeared. There was a hint of worry on her face, but when she saw Soren's determined expression, she could only bite her lips and nod. After all, this was a battle between greater divine powers. It was impossible to say that they weren't worried about Soren, because no one had absolute confidence. Come back alive. Fallen Witch's figure also appeared on top of the tower. She stared at Soren with an expressionless face, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged him fiercely. Regarding this, Gloria did not seem to change at all. It seemed that she vaguely knew something. I'll wait for your return. Gloria stood on the astrology platform and gently stroked her belly as if she was trying to convey something to Soren. Soren nodded and smiled. Don't worry. I never do anything that I'm not completely sure about. 2 rays of light appeared. Brother. Brother. Vivian's and Lillian's figures appeared, and the 2 little faces had determined expressions. We'll go with you. Soren did not hesitate at this moment and nodded. Okay. The 2 little girls' voices were unquestionable, and Soren knew what to do at this time. Outside the arcane tower. Little sparkling snowflakes appeared, and Princess Royal's figure quietly appeared. She glanced at the several women in front of her and frowned slightly. Then she said, let's go. The opportunity will be gone in the blink of an eye. A hazy figure appeared. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. The goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair slightly and glanced at Soren, then said, what happens next will depend on you. The next battle. Other than Princess Royal who could fight alongside Soren, the other goddesses could only cheer for Soren at most. Whether it was the goddess of agriculture or the goddess of wealth, it was impossible for them to help him fight against Naruto and Klemvox. The goddess of ocean was also completely impossible. She was unwilling to fight against Sirik the last time. Thinking of this, Soren could not help but turn his gaze to Princess Royal. Although the Princess Royal was often cold and indifferent, he did not expect that in this fateful battle, she was the only one who was willing to fight side by side with Soren. The goddesses in this world would flock to him when there were benefits, but when it came to life and death, there were not many who could be relied on. Their relationship with Soren could only be one of mutual benefit. If he really thought that he could subdue these goddesses by sleeping with them, he would have died a long time ago. There were many goddesses who had a good relationship with Soren, but looking at the goddesses who were here today, he knew that these goddesses were unreliable. Goddess of magic, goddess of wealth, fiery lady, goddess of joy, none of the goddesses who had some relationship with him in the past could be seen today. However, just as Soren was about to teleport away, an absolutely unexpected person appeared. It was a very sudden appearance. It was a gorgeous woman, wearing a dark green dress and a veil on her face. No one knew when she appeared outside the arcane tower, but there was a faint smile on her lips. When Soren looked at her, she suddenly smiled playfully and said, surprised by my arrival? The others present were shocked, and at the same time, they looked as if they were facing a great enemy. I really didn't expect it. Soren felt that this face was very familiar. It only took a moment for him to remember the other party's identity. He smiled bitterly and said, I'm really surprised. Lady Calamity. The goddess of misfortune, Ben Saba. A goddess that Soren would never have expected to appear here. I'm just here to give you my blessings. The female incarnation of the goddess of misfortune slowly walked in front of Soren, then kissed him on the cheek and whispered, your enemies will be shrouded in misfortune, a goddess that no one would have expected. Now, she was betting on Soren, and it seemed like she was betting a lot. Note, curse of misfortune. Why? Soren was puzzled. Lady Calamity smiled and glanced at Princess Royal with a disdainful expression. Then she said, "After all, we are all in the abyss, aren't we? Someone outside of fate. The new child of fate." The beautiful figure chuckled. Then she slowly disappeared. This evil goddess had a bad reputation. It was said that she was narrow-minded and vengeful. She was extremely jealous of her sister, the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune was loved by everyone, but she was very afraid of her. Lady Calamity had a special divine power. She had the power of fate, opportunity, and craftiness. She could bless others to avoid misfortune, and she could also curse some people to bring misfortune to them. This was also useful for gods, although the effect was far less than when it was used on mortals. Lady Calamity's figure disappeared. Soren didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. If the goddess of fortune didn't choose to help Naruto and Clemvox because of her, then this was definitely a big advantage for him. Chapter 1082. The twin of destiny was unpredictable. They were outside of the circle of the gods. Apart from things related to fate, they were only interested in the struggle between each other. Whether it was the Lady of Misfortune or the Goddess of Fortune. Since the disaster of Dawn, they had drifted away from the gods and were unwilling to get close to any gods. However, no one could ignore their existence. Soren was now very confused, but he did not hesitate. Since the Lady of Misfortune said that his enemies would be shrouded in misfortune, then this matter must be true. The power of the twin of destiny was almost the same. With her support, even if Soren's enemies were not shrouded in misfortune, Soren himself would not be unlucky. The greatest ability of this goddess was to keep people away from misfortune and always keep their luck above average. In the land of bones. The final battle had already broken out. Countless skeletons piled up into a mountain. As Naruto's scepter fell, thousands of skeleton warriors climbed up in the blink of an eye. The altar had been destroyed, but there were still countless skeletons on the battlefield, especially the corpses of the senior demons. Naruto had even summoned some powerful undead creatures. Although Naruto was suppressed by the God of Light and was at a disadvantage, after all, his overall strength was still there. The disaster of the undead was planned by him, and after the underworld was seized by him, he gained the power of the death god system. Clemvox's time as a god was not as long as Naruto's. When he was a mortal, he was only a warrior. His combat power was not at the top among the great divine powers. A fierce battle broke out. Clemvox waved the touch of destiny and rushed to Naruto in front of him. This was a divine heavy sword, and Clemvox was wearing a set of strange silver-white chain mail. Kiki. In the face of Clemvox's attack, Naruto did not have any fear and directly waved his light blade. Naruto was a real combat god of death. His main profession was necromancer level 15, priest level 20, rogue level 15, which was a standard profession that could cast spells and fight in close combat. Naruto's attribute template was all attribute mastery. All of his attributes were above 25 points. His agility, wisdom, and intelligence were all above 35 points. To put it simply, this was a god that basically had no weaknesses. Unless it was suppressed by someone like the God of Light, who was close to a great existence, it would be able to win against any other god. The God of Light had severely injured him. But for some reason, the God of Light did not decide to kill Naruto. Instead, he chose to release these souls and leave. This was also a chance for Naruto. It could even be said to be his last chance. Because as long as he killed Clemvox, he could still be promoted to a great divine power, and no other gods could compete with him for the position of the God of Death. In this way, even if he met the God of Light again in the future, Naruto would have no fear. The God of Light's biggest mistake was not to kill him together with Clemvox. At least that was what Naruto thought. And now, this mistake would give him a great opportunity. The God of Suffering was not a combat god, and Clemvox's strength was not as good as his. As long as he could find a way to kill Clemvox and stabilize the position of the God of Death, then no god could shake Naruto's position. As for the matters after the Avatar crisis, when the gods returned to the God's kingdom, everyone could sit down and talk about it slowly. The power of death could not be inherited easily. Looking at the ability of the whole material plane, there were only a few who could inherit the power of death, and in Naruto's view, only he and Clemvox could do it. The ancient god of death, Jurgil, was basically not in charge anymore. Although Naruto had made a big mistake, Clemvox had also failed in his duty. The gods were not willing to get involved in this battle. The god of light did not kill Naruto, on the one hand, to preserve his strength, and on the other hand, to let them fight it out. Long sleep, field. Compared with Clemvox, who was a warrior god, Naruto was much stronger in his spellcasting ability. In desperation, he could only open the long sleep field. Otherwise, Naruto could resurrect the dead indefinitely because he had more divine power and countless divine spells. Divine Aura. Naruto held the black staff and knocked it heavily on the ground. In an instant, an invisible divine power spread to a range of 17 kilometers. This was a more powerful ability than Aura. Naruto directly opened the divine aura that integrated many fields, and this ability was often only mastered by gods who had been sealed for a long time. Under the effect of this divine aura, Clemvox's long sleep field was directly ineffective, and the spells cast by his chosen to dispel the dead, dominate the dead, and so on were all ineffective. The confrontation between the two gods of death directly offset most of the additional death abilities. God's Descent. Regional Divine Shockwave. Naruto in front of him used the rogue spellcasting ability, and Clemvox could not help but be angry. He directly entered the state of God's Descent, and a regional divine shockwave opened a passage directly in front of Naruto. Clemvox firmly believed that as a warrior, he could suppress Naruto as long as he was close. Hee hee. Naruto made a disdainful smile, and suddenly stretched out his pale finger bones. Countless black silk threads flew out and rushed to the chosen behind Clemvox. Regional Touch of Death. Clemvox was immune to all instant death spells, but his believers could not do this. When Naruto completed the spell in an instant, a large number of Clemvox's believers fell down immediately. Many of them turned into skeletons in an instant, and their souls were controlled by Naruto's evil power. In contrast, Naruto's advantage was too great. Because he was the life hater, most of Naruto's believers were undead, and the rest were not undead or half undead. Naruto could use the big skills of death without any scruples, but Clemvox absolutely could not. Dang! A dull loud sound echoed in the middle of the battlefield. Clemvox finally rushed in front of Naruto and forced Naruto back a few steps with just one blow. But Naruto did not care. He waved his light energy blade while completing another evil spell. Life Drain. A strange black line flew out from Naruto's cloak, and then these black lines connected to everyone regardless of friend or foe. Whether it was Naruto's believers or Clemvox's believers, everyone in the vicinity was connected, and the vitality of all these people began to be absorbed by Naruto. Clemvox's strength was really strong. Just a frontal attack injured Naruto, but the injury recovered in a flash, and the others nearby were pale. Whether it was the undead or the living. Naruto's terrible specialization in necromancy allowed him to absorb vitality regardless of friend or foe. This evil ability made him almost invincible. Legendary Dispel Magic. Clemvox was angry, but he did not lose his mind. He immediately used the legendary Dispel Magic, but it failed directly. Naruto's casting level was about 35, and the casting level of necromancy spells was above 40. Some necromancy spells were blessed by the domain, and the casting level could reach about 45. That was to say, even Soren could not dispel it, let alone Clemvox, who was a warrior god before becoming a god. Naruto was not afraid. The terrifying black light would automatically lock onto the target nearby, and when the target died, it would automatically switch positions. Not only were there Clemver's believers nearby, but there were also a large number of undead and necromancers who had been resurrected in hell. He did not even activate his divine shield, and he was completely focused on facing Clemver's ferocious attacks head-on. Chapter 1083. Naruto must have cheated. Outside the battlefield, Soren watched all this and said with a stunned expression, "Fortunately, Clemvox took the lead first." What a strange ability. There was no way to suppress this ability at all. Unless all the people near Naruto were killed, all the people below the level of gods would have their life sucked. Every time Clemvox attacked Naruto, a person nearby would fall. It might be the undead who served Naruto, or it might be Clemvox's believers. After a short confrontation, the morale of Clemvox's believers plummeted. Even the god of suffering restrained his believers from approaching. Although he was kind, he was not stupid. In this situation, the believers would die if they approached. Hatred made Clemvox have no intention of stopping at all. The Avatar crisis had greatly reduced the power of the gods. It was impossible for Clemver to kill Nero in one fell swoop. Under such circumstances, his believers had suffered great casualties. These believers had basically died at the hands of Clemver. Hee. As expected, Naruto started a psychological attack and mocked, "Weak Clemvox. I didn't expect you to have such a fierce side. I'm really impressed. Look around. These believers who served you all died under your attack. The one who died just now was your god's chosen one, right?" More than a dozen of Clemvox's believers had fallen, among which there was no lack of legendary masters. "No." Clemvox roared like a trapped beast and roared, "These people all died because of you. You should pay the price for all this." Finally, he could not bear the death of his believers and said in a deep voice, "All of you, step back." The morale of Clemvox's believers was low. Hearing this, they hesitated a little and began to retreat. In this case, they had no choice. The strange black silk stayed in a range. Although Clemvox's believers retreated, the undead controlled by Naruto gathered. These silk threads that absorbed life fell on them. How naive. A large number of undead surrounded them. Naruto had a contemptuous expression and mocked, "Do you think you can defeat me by yourself?" Countless undead gathered. Every attack of Clemvox could cause a lot of damage to Naruto, and several undead nearby would fall. However, more undead were still gathering. There were at least tens of thousands of undead troops, and Naruto's believers behind them. Clemvox did not know how long it would take to kill these tens of thousands of undead. The god of suffering could not provide any help to the god of suffering now because many undead lords had stopped the broken monks. Naruto had not opened his divine shield so far. From the current situation, he had the absolute advantage. "Do you want to fight?" Princess Royal's voice sounded. Soren shook his head and said, "No hurry. I'm waiting for someone to appear." The battle continued. Clemvox's power seemed to be endless. He ordered his church to attack the undead, and he kept attacking Naruto. His divine power was rapidly consumed. Although the undead nearby were not strong, there were still more or less high-grade undead that could attack him once, and each attack weakened his divine shield. This scene was so familiar. Last time, Clemvox was also besieged by countless undead liches, and these were forced to escape with serious injuries. Soren was waiting patiently. Because he knew that there was still one existence who had not appeared, and she was very likely to be Clemvox's backup. Area Dispel Magic. Arcane Domain. When Clemvox's suppression became more and more obvious, suddenly a dazzling light of arcane magic emerged, followed by a powerful magic emerged, and Naruto's life drain was dispelled. A beautiful figure appeared on the battlefield. Verges, the goddess of death and magic. Another god from another world. After she failed to win over Soren, she seemed to have reached some kind of agreement with Clemvox. At this moment, she quickly dispelled Naruto's spell, and at the same time, cast a large-scale attack spell. Arcane Torrent. Energy Storm. Countless undead nearby fell, but then they were resurrected in Naruto's domain. In the face of the sudden appearance of the enemy, Naruto was very alert. He did not hesitate to open his divine shield, and at the same time, connected the touch of death to the nearby ancient mummies. These undead were difficult to be killed by large-scale spells, and at the same time, their vitality could also be absorbed. Smite of Destruction. Clemvox finally seized this opportunity. Powerful divine power gathered on the heavy sword, and a black light appeared, and he slashed wildly toward Naruto. Outside the battlefield, Soren finally made his move and said in a deep voice, "Activate the arcane tower." Plane waymark 115,245. High Priest, help me to lock the attack range with divine power. Indiscriminate attack within 3 kilometers. Even the Queen of Spiders could not resist the arcane crystal pulse cannon. The damage it caused to the divine shield was very terrifying. Just after all the targets appeared, Soren gave the order to attack, and the arcane tower in the city of Moder had already risen to a height of tens of thousands of meters. Gloria was responsible for driving the Mies nucleus, and the Fallen which was responsible for activating the elemental furnace. The energy of the entire arcane tower was activated to the limit, and then a dazzling light energy impact directly cut through the space. Boom! The battlefield in front of them was hit by a devastating bombardment in an instant. This was a crazy bombardment that did not distinguish between friend and foe. Whether it was Clemvox's church or Naruto's believers, they all suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless skeletons were directly vaporized, and even legendary figures were killed instantly. Do it. When a round of ultra-long-range energy attacks was over, Soren's figure immediately entered the battlefield. The nearby space had been completely blocked. Neither Clemvox nor Naruto wanted the other party to escape. The terrible ultra-long-range energy attacks directly destroyed a part of the battlefield, and both Naruto and Clemvox were very embarrassed at the moment. Clemvox had consumed too much power at the beginning, and at this time, his divine shield was about to dissipate. Cold ice and snow were flying. Within a range visible to the naked eye, the bodies of countless undead were quickly covered with a layer of white frost, and their movement speed and reaction speed were rapidly reduced. In the distance, in the arcane tower in the city of Moder, Gloria also gave an order at the moment when Soren attacked. She said in a serious voice, "Open the space waymark. Teleport the golem army. Activate the magic construct number 1. Activate the magic construct experimental body. Teleport the diamond golem into the battlefield. Thaling prepare to open a large portal." Chapter 1084. It was impossible for Soren to wait for a winner to emerge from such a battle. Because whether it was Clemvox's death or Naruto's death, the power of death would be absorbed by the winner. At that time, a new greater divine power would be born. Once again, it proved how unreliable the goddesses of this world were. When the figures of Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal suddenly appeared on the battlefield, the goddess of death and magic, Verges, was aware of the presence of so many mid-level gods and above, and there was also a greater divine power, Soren. After suffering a super long-range energy attack from the arcane tower, she did not hesitate to use her special magic priesthood to teleport to the edge of the battlefield. Then, without even saying a word to Clemvox, she escaped on the spot. She escaped, she left in an unusually swift and decisive manner without any hesitation. She was a god from another world who came to this material plane for the sake of benefits. If there were benefits to be gained, she would naturally take action. But if she was in danger, then she would leave without hesitation. It was impossible for her to stay and fight to the death. For this little benefit, it was not worth for a mid-level god like her to risk her life. The Avatar crisis was about to end. As long as they lived to return to their divine kingdom, the gods still had countless years to enjoy and squander. If not for this, the first-generation goddess of wealth and the previous generation goddess of magic would have tried their best to sneak back to their divine kingdom during the last Avatar crisis. Just like those goddesses who were close to Soren suddenly fell silent at this time, the goddess of death and magic also became a bitch in the face of life and death. She did not hesitate to betray the agreement with Clemvox. "It seems that the only reliable ones are those around me. No wonder the God of Light has such powerful divine power, and there are so few members in the divine system. Most of them are personally cultivated gods because these old gods are not reliable at all. Soren watched as the goddess of death and magic fled, but he had no intention of stopping her. He could have stopped them, but Soren's targets were Klemvox and Naruto. The goddess of death and magic's escape meant that Soren had one less opponent, and also made him understand the nature of most of the goddesses in this world. He couldn't help but glance at Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal, who all wore solemn expressions. In such a battle of life and death, there was still someone who stood by his side and gave him their back. Obviously, he was much luckier than most of the other gods. The second round of ultra-long-range tactical attacks were scattered around the periphery. The home field had basically been cleared, but in order to prevent Naruto from resurrecting too many undead, Gloria controlled the arcane tower to carry out a second round of tactical attacks, clearing out most of the undead nearby. At the same time, Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal all attacked Klemvox in an instant. The reason why they did not choose Naruto was because he was an undead. It was more difficult to kill him than Klemvox, and his overall strength was currently a little stronger. Ice prison. Princess Royal pressed her hand on the ground, and the ice spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the area within hundreds of meters became a cage made entirely of ice. Sword of Annihilation. Although Lillian and Vivian could not defeat the enemy alone, the two of them together were close to the level of a great divine power. The Dread Lord was originally a great divine power, and his divinity and divinity were about 3 times that of an intermediate divine power. After this power was distributed to the Son of Fear, it gathered again. About 1/3 of it was absorbed by Soren, and the other 2/3 were divided between Vivian and Lillian. If a part of the divine power was excluded, then Vivian and Lillian together were equivalent to more than 1.5 intermediate divine powers. They were already qualified to participate in this battle. Avatar. Soren was still the main force in the battle. At the moment of the attack, he activated Avatar, and then his figure split into 2 and turned into a stream of light, slashing toward Klemvox in front of him. Rogue versus Warrior. Soren was not afraid of facing Klemvox head-on at all. Damn it. Klemvox was also covered in blood at the moment. He had consumed a lot of divine power earlier, and now he had to withstand a wave of superconducting pulse energy cannon. His divine shield was basically broken. He felt like he was very unlucky today. He encountered all kinds of bad luck, and the goddess of death and magic ran away without saying a word. He consumed a lot of divine power in the battle with Naruto, and this wave of energy attack also caused his church to suffer heavy losses. In this case, he and Soren were at an absolute disadvantage. Klemvox even had the idea of escaping, but the Princess Royal used her divine power to create an ice prison and directly trapped him inside. Divine power impact. With Naruto outside, Soren gave up most of his tactics and directly chose the simplest way. That was to completely suppress the enemy with divine power. Waves of divine power hit Klemvox. This was the most violent way for a god to fight. It was a battle of the divine power gap between the two sides. Divine power impact was divine damage, which ignored most resistance. The power consumed by one divine power impact was about enough to cast 1 or 2 legendary divine spells, which directly caused about 120 to 240 points of divine damage. This kind of damage was basically unavoidable. Mortals were likely to die in the face of it, and gods could only rely on their divine shield to resist. Convert Slaughter EXP. Soren's divine power seemed to be endless. After the first wave of impact, he began to convert the accumulated Slaughter EXP. Then his figure shuttled through the shadows and approached Klemvox's body. His opponent's injury was very serious. The opportunity was in an instant. If Klemvox was given a little time, he could cast Greater Restoration. Then his injury would be completely healed, and even if he had no divine power, he could still hold on for a while. Frozen Kingdom. Princess Royal also keenly grasped this opportunity. She raised her hands and activated the power of ice and snow. In an instant, everything was frozen in a range visible to the naked eye. Die. Soren's figure attacked from the left and right. Even Klemvox couldn't be sure which one was real and which one was fake. He futilely used the last of his divine power to hold up a shield, but the next moment, it was broken. Then a silver-white stream of light flashed across his body, and Klemvox's figure was directly split into two. Boom! It was as if the whole world was shaking. With the death of Klemvox, who had exhausted his power, the realm of eternal rest that shrouded the material plane suddenly collapsed, and the characteristics of the material plane also changed in an instant. The surging golden light spread out. As the former king of the dead, Klemvox had a very large amount of divine power. Most of this power poured into Soren's body, and a small part flew to Vivian and Lillian. Even the Princess Royal next to him and Naruto outside the frozen prison received a little bit of divine brilliance. However, most of the power was still absorbed by Soren. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.